Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku in a World Without Quirks? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku wasn't sure how to feel. GLaDOS rarely chose him of all people to test, especially considering his age. He didn't know how long had passed since he'd been frozen, but he just knew it had been a shockingly long time. The testing chambers were run down, and though GLaDOS did her best to clean up, there were still plants and debris littered all over the facility. He was going through the motions. Per the norm, the thrill of flying through the air with physics-bending technology had long since been exciting. Test after test. He knew GLaDOS could be ruthless when testing, but he knew she couldn't help it. She was programmed to test, to conduct experiments. Unfortunately for him, he just happened to be selected for her latest machinations. He was stuck on one of her brain-scrambling courses. It was hard enough to solve such complex puzzles without GLaDOS' constant bickering and complaining. If I'd known you would take this long, I would have taken more time getting ready this morning. Izuku rolled his eyes. She was condescending at best, but he could feel a deep sadness within her. He didn't know the full story, but he'd heard rumors. Rumors from some of the other cannon fodder she threw around in the name of science. It was rare she had more than one test subject awake at any given time, but apparently that particular chamber had been designed for cooperation. He didn't particularly care for GLaDOS, seeing as she'd kept him trapped for however long it had been. Her insults were cutting, and the monotonous way in which she delivered them made him feel small. Not worthy of her attention. Crippling self-doubt crept up every time he wasn't sure how to solve an objectively difficult problem. She was a force to be reckoned with, in complete control of the whole facility. She had eyes everywhere, and one misstep could end in death. Or rather, a temporary death before being roughly reassembled by some of the bots she had in an iron grip. He knew she was a bad person? She knew that he knew, and yet she kept picking him for tests. Maybe she thought he was in a class above the other test subjects. As he flew through yet another portal, the exit door finally opened. He exhaled in relief, walking to the elevator. She usually took this opportunity to bitch about his lousy performance, or compare him to Atlas and Peabody, two of her testing robots. This time, however, she seemed reluctant to speak, which was almost frightening in itself. Izuku picked at the portal gun resting on his forearm as he waited for the elevator to move. You know, I discovered some old testing areas when I lost control over the facility. Would you be interested in seeing them? Though, I doubt you would know how to use technology as old as that. Midoriya scoffed, mostly to himself. He didn't want to respond. To indulge her. But he was desperately lonely. Fine. It's not like you would give me a choice either way. Wow, perhaps I was wrong about you. You can learn. Midoriya huffed in frustration. Clever. When'd you come up with that one? She didn't grace him with a response. He rolled his eyes as the elevator made its speedy descent. One elevator led to another, and another again. At one point, a pigeon flew past him. GLaDOS was oddly unresponsive. When he finally stepped out of the last elevator, he was faced with a massive lobby area. Slowly, he made his way through, examining the old furniture and posters as he went. What is this place? GLaDOS didn't respond right away. He stopped in front of a large painting of a man, the English name, Cave Johnson, inscribed on the small plate. This is the old reception, from when this facility first opened. This is where the test subjects would be welcomed by the scientists. Izuku traversed the room, setting the knocked-over chairs upright. You know you don't need to do that, right? Izuku nodded. Maybe not, but this place is part of your history, isn't it? Why else would you bring me here? You're observant. That's a good trait to have when doing deadly tests. Was that a compliment? An actual compliment? Yes, I'm complimenting you, and you better savor it, because this is probably the only time I'll ever give you one. Oops, he'd been muttering again. Well then, thank you. He grinned. She sighed. Why not go through that door and try out some of the older tests? We're going to be spending quite some time down here. Midoriya shrugged. He proceeded into the main entrance. A booming voice blasted over the comms, welcoming famous people to the facility and establishing some basic information pre-testing. Is that Cave? Cave Johnson? Yes, he was the owner of this place. What happened to him? This area is so underdeveloped in comparison to your normal test chambers. He died. Poisoning from the ground-up moon rocks we use to create the portal surfaces. Midoriya lit up, before wilting slightly again. I'm sorry to hear that, but moon rocks? That is so interesting. Did you start making wallpaper out of it, or something? Or maybe a gel would be more efficient. Did you, Ma Dash? I'm going to save you your breath. Yes, the first portals were cast onto a gel made from ground-up moon rocks. So cool. Izuku traversed the old chambers, solving some of the tests. They were a lot less deadly than GLaDOS usual, so that was a welcome surprise. He loved just looking, seeing how far the company had come, how many advancements they had made. As he completed another chamber, the booming voice echoed around the chambers again. It was different this time. It was more bitter, harsher. It confused him, but he didn't immediately comment on it. For completing the tests, you can collect your $60, but if you let us take you apart, put some science stuff in you, and put you back together, we'll give you another $60. Thank you. I can't believe I'm thanking these people, and don't loiter around too much. Or touch anything. Caroline, can you get me some more painkillers? The voice cut out again. Izuku was beyond confused. Paying people to do the tests? Taking people apart? It was frightening. What was that about? No response. GLaDOS? Still no response. He shook off his shock and walked through the next door. The room looked weird. Like, really weird. There was medical equipment lying around, and a few tables lined up along the room. Izuku's sweat dropped at the absolutely caked blood on the walls. Holy shit! Is this where they disassembled test subjects? GLaDOS still hadn't responded. It was starting to freak him out. She usually couldn't stop herself from talking about something or another. The silence was eerie. It didn't help that there were no portal surfaces in sight. No familiar white, just a dull yellow paint that was chipping and splashed with ancient blood. He slowly approached one of the medical tables. It was the cleanest of all of them, almost no dust covering the surface. That should have been his warning. The moment he sat down, the door slammed shut. He tried to stand up, but 4 mechanical arms he hadn't seen grabbed a limb each. He was roughly pushed back onto the table, arms and legs akimbo. He was starting to freak out. Was there an error with the old tech? He thought it wouldn't be operational, considering its age. He struggled in his binds, but the claw hands gripped him harder. A 5th claw pulled the portal gun from his hand, and he nearly screamed. He was sweating, breathing too quickly. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he realized he was having a panic attack. Struggling won't achieve anything. Those claws are practically new. He looked around the room wildly, looking for the source of GLaDOS' voice. A monitor off to the side had her robotic head in full view. GLaDOS? What's going on? Let me go. I'm afraid I can't do that. Why? I've made some impressive progress on an old pet project of mine, thanks to you and some of the other test subjects. I want to try and implement it in a live subject. All of the other subjects died. Such a shame, really. Are you insane? I don't want to die. Here, I'll put your mind at ease. There's a 1 in 15,200,058 chance you'll survive. How does that make me feel better? Alright, then I won't try to comfort you. I was just trying to help, you know. You don't have to get all angry at me. Izuku was sobbing at this point. He had known, deep down, that he wouldn't survive the tests. He hadn't volunteered for it. He didn't even remember how he'd ended up at Aperture, but he knew deep down he would never get out. That he would die here, alone and forgotten. Only one other person had ever escaped the chambers and lived. The one they called Chell. He wasn't sure if he believed the rumors about her, but if they were true, oh how he wished he was her. She was long gone, safe and away from this monster. He stopped resisting as it hit him. He'd been here for years. GLaDOS refused to tell him how long, but time still passed. He was only a teenager, but he'd been cryogenically frozen more times than he could count. His family must be dead. Long cold in the ground. He didn't react as a claw plunged into his stomach. He saw white and there was screaming. It took him a hot second to realize it was him. The pain was so unlike anything he'd ever experienced. So much worse than being reassembled. As a second claw arm sliced into his chest, and he blacked out. There was ringing. Was he dead? Was this the afterlife? Izuku had never been very religious, but he hoped he was dead. He didn't want to know what happened to him. He hadn't thought GLaDOS was as cruel as she turned out to be. He'd heard her sing once. She had sounded so sad. He tried to reserve judgment of her, but she never tried to make him like her. There was no appeasement. She just pushed and pushed him, and when he failed, she would insult him like it didn't matter. Like he didn't matter. And it hurt. He didn't ask to be stuck in that facility, but there he had been. He never thought GLaDOS liked him, but when she invited him to the low levels of the facility, he'd thought she cared. Cared about him. He let himself be vulnerable, and look where that got him. Probably dead, or close enough to it. Are you still there? The voice startled him. Turrets. Shit. He jumped to his feet and ducked behind an overturned table. He slowly glanced over the edge, but there was no turret in sight. He stood up, looking around the room. Not dead then. What a shame. There was fresh blood on the walls. Blood? His blood? It hit him. He shrieked, jumping back from the claw arms surrounding the table in front of him. Tears flowed down his cheeks, but they didn't affect his vision. That was odd. Very odd. He looked to the monitor GLaDOS had once watched from. Nothing but static. He looked for his portal gun, but the device was nowhere to be seen. What am I supposed to do without a portal gun? That's like the only thing I had going for me. Oh, you're awake. He felt like he should have jumped, maybe screamed, but he didn't. He didn't feel surprised to see her. That was odd. He looked in the direction of the computer monitor. I have to say, for a while there I thought you wouldn't make it. You fainted far quicker than the other test subjects, but then again, none of them lived. Izuku didn't respond, just stared at the monitor. All right, I suppose I deserve that. Still nothing. Why don't you take the elevator back up? I'll show you what I did. That caught his interest. He needed to know what had been done to him. He made his way to the elevator, but something was strange. He couldn't feel anything aching. Considering how much pain he'd been in, he thought he would have had some lasting aches. Something. Anything. But he was numb. And he was angry. He reached the top of the elevator, and took the same route he'd taken before. Before he knew it, he was in front of GLaDOS herself, in her massive lair. Yes, he called it her lair. Welcome. Can I interest you in some fresh oxygen? He glared at her. All right, I'm sure you just want to know what exactly I did. You heard how Mr. Johnson offered the then subjects money to disassemble and reassemble them? I did that. I just added something you didn't have before. Izuku looked down at himself. His clothes didn't have a scratch. I took the liberty of changing your clothes for you. Once your heart didn't stop, I let the assembly bots finish their meaningless jobs before giving you a new jumpsuit. And my feet. Oh, I'm surprised you noticed so fast. I removed your boots. But you won't need them anymore. One of my new pieces is far more efficient. And durable. Izuku stared up at her. To sum it up, I put the boots in your legs. He blinked. You're not kidding. GLaDOS hummed. No, I have no use for humor. It wastes precious time. Izuku glowered at her. What? Don't you like your new enhancements? They're much more efficient. A warning though, never look down the operational end of the device. And how, pray tell, does that apply here? Don't spend too much time staring at your feet is all I'll say about it. Now back to testing. I have some new chambers set up, just for you. Well golly, I must be the most lucky boy in the world. I know that was sarcasm, but yes, you are. It had been a while. A long while. Izuku had been moved from his incubator to a relaxation chamber, under the guise that it was easier to fetch him for testing. He'd survived some positively mind-boggling tests before, but they had become even more difficult. Izuku couldn't help but wonder if GLaDOS even cared if he could solve them. After all, he was just her crash test dummy for her new tech. After one of the tests, he'd been making his way back to his chamber when he heard a voice. A quiet but determined voice. His first thought, naturally, was that it was a test. He glanced around for any cameras or something that would allow GLaDOS to see him, but he couldn't spot a thing. His second thought was that it was a turret. Turrets were as irritating as robots could get. They were different from GLaDOS, or Atlas and Peabody. They weren't sentient in the slightest, though they did experience a simulated form of pain. They could only follow their programming. And their programming dictated that they constantly try to fill him with bullets. It was scary at first, and he hadn't wanted to hurt them, but as time went on, he lost any sympathy he had for them. They were killing machines, simple as that, but there was something odd about the turret he could hear. It sounded like it wanted him to find it. Izuku had never seen that in a turret before. He reluctantly made his way over, his portal gun brandished like it could actually fire bullets. "Hello." He glanced around the dark corner, and there it sat, laying haphazardly on its side along an old conveyor belt. Its pointer laser focused on him, and he ducked back around the corner. "I'm different." Its voice was no more emotional than the others, but the turrets had a script. Weren't artificial intelligence. He slowly leaned back around the corner, looking at the turret. "You heard me." He approached, still brandishing his portal gun aggressively. "Yes, I heard you. What do you want?" It didn't respond for a bit. He wondered briefly if it actually was a trap. "Freedom." Izuku blinked. The turret was still looking at him. He sighed, lowering the portal gun. "Me too, buddy. She'll keep hurting you." He looked up from his feet. What? What are you talking about?" The ancient Egyptians would pull a deceased's brain out through their nose during mummification, in an attempt to let them reach the afterlife. "Wait, back up a second. You'll save the eraser." Izuku stuttered as the turret watched him. He floundered for a moment. "Hey, what's going to happen to you? Down this conveyor belt is the incinerator room. I'll be melted. You'll die." "Yes, I suppose I will." Izuku thought for a moment. He raised his hand and grabbed the turret. Thank GLaDOS for the portal gun. He had no idea how it could literally rip holes in the fabric of reality and also be able to hold things more than twice his own weight. He started back on the trek to his relaxation chamber, turret in hand. "Where are we going?" "My room. I won't let you die here." "A hero." The turret didn't say anything else, and Izuku didn't ask it any questions. Once he'd arrived back, he set it down in the corner opposite his bed. "Where did you come across that abomination?" GLaDOS' voice surprised him. She usually never talked to him after testing. It was unsettling. "Conveyor belt? But it's useless. It won't help you with the tests, and it won't keep you company. It has no purpose, because it couldn't fulfill the one assigned to it. Humans make attachments. Not that you'd know." That shut her up pretty quickly, he thought. "Thank you." He looked back at the turret. Its light was glowing red again. "Oh, it's no trouble. I'm glad I have someone to talk to other than GLaDOS all the time." He was frozen again. It felt different than his incubator. Mainly because he was standing upright in his incubator, rather than down. The bed in his relaxation chamber was surprisingly nice. It was comfy and he liked waking up in it, even if it meant he would have to do more tests. It had been another while. He found it frightening how much time had probably passed since he'd been woken up for the first time since he had gotten to the facility. The turret was right about GLaDOS. She brought him down to the lower floors several times now, and every time he would walk out a little less human. First it was his feet and eyes. Why did he even need robotic eyes? GLaDOS never explained, but he didn't need to blink much anymore, so maybe that was it. A little underwhelming, really. After that, it was his stomach. There, in the center of his abdomen, was a white fiberglass circle. He was never told what it was for. He didn't want to know. After his stomach was his chest, and then his shoulders, and finally, his hands. The changes to his hands scared him more than any of the others. Where he once had calloused, freckled hands, he now had white fiberglass digits, with black lining where his fingers creased. The scariest part was probably what the changes in his hands were even for. Let's just say he doesn't have to carry a portal gun with him anymore. He kind of became one. With as little as a thought, his new hands would shift and change into a gross approximation of a portal gun. The glowing orange and blue circles would rise up out of his palm, It looked mesmerizing, but Izuku hated it. He didn't care if it was more efficient or a new innovation. He wanted to be himself. And he didn't feel like himself. He felt like an abomination. A robot. Like GLaDOS. The tests he once found hard became starkly easier. He found himself chatting with GLaDOS as he went through the chambers. And it scared him. He hated her for what she did to him, and yet he started seeing the similarities between himself and her. He couldn't help but compare them. You zoned out again. He snapped out of his funk, looking at the turret. He'd started calling it Ret. It seemed to like the name, and it never corrected him, so he just stuck with it. Sorry, what were you saying? She called for you? He felt the temperature of the room drop. She definitely wanted to talk with him about something. Or just stick mechanical claws in him again. He exhaled shakily, standing from his bed. Thanks, I'll talk to you later? Her name is Caroline. He blinked. Caroline? GLaDOS had a name? Caroline? As in GLaDOS' name is Caroline? It'll stun her. What? They'll find me. Who? Ret didn't respond. Izuku didn't try to coax it into talking more. He made his way to GLaDOS' lair, shaking imperceptibly. Ah, you're here. I was beginning to think you were ignoring me. He approached her, walking up without hesitation. Is there something you wanted from me? No, I just wanted to talk. Izuku raised an eyebrow at the hulking robot hanging from the ceiling. Her yellow eye narrowed slightly. But if you would prefer tests? No. Let's talk. Izuku hated that he was still scared of her. He knew he had the right to hate her, but other than Ret, the only person he could talk to is GLaDOS. That, and he was desperate for her approval. He didn't know why, but whenever she would complain about his performance or insult him, he would feel like a child again. He sighed and sat down cross-legged in front of her. So, what did you want to talk about? GLaDOS shifted down, coming closer to him. Well, I was hoping we could have an educated discussion. Tell me, what do you know about this facility? Izuku raised an eyebrow, but answered anyways. I know it was opened in the 1940s, by a man named Cave Johnson. I know he started developing groundbreaking technology, but went bankrupt after being beaten out by Black Mesa. He got deathly ill from breathing in the ground-up moon rocks, and he wanted to pass the company to his assistant. He paused, trying to gauge her reaction. She wasn't reacting at all. It wasn't that strange, she usually didn't emote much, especially not with her physical body. Her name was Caroline. Now that got a reaction. It was minuscule, almost unnoticeable, just a tiny flinch, but he noticed. He picked up on it immediately. Izuku knew he was swimming in uncharted waters, but he persisted. He wanted her to take over, even if she didn't want to. He had been working on new technology, so he could upload his brain to an AI and stay around long after his body died from the poison in his system. He knew she would refuse, so he gave his scientists explicit permission to do whatever it took. GLaDOS still didn't speak, but she was lingering on his every word. Almost like she was waiting for him to realize something. Something important, if he could just put two and two together. It wasn't a question, but she didn't have an answer. She looked away from him, but she didn't move. I'm sorry. I'm sorry he did that to you. She looked back to him. Why are you sympathizing with me? After all the pain I've put you through in the name of science? You can't help it, can you? If it's in your programming, I don't blame you. Just because you don't blame me doesn't mean you like me. Izuku scratched at his chin. I don't think I'll ever like you, but that doesn't mean that what he did was right. She hesitated. That was a new one. I didn't want this, A booming, robotic voice blasted from all of the speakers, red and yellow lights flashing incessantly as the warning bells chimed. Unauthorized personnel detected inside the facility, self-destruct imminent in T-2 minutes. GLaDOS jerked upwards. What? How? Izuku was on his feet in a beat. He glanced around at the monitors, all displaying the same image. Warning. This had never happened before. No one had ever broken in. Izuku didn't even know how far underground they were, but he knew the facility was supposed to be next to impossible to access without blueprints. So, who was breaking in? Eraserhead had very few regrets. Going to UA? He never regretted it. Becoming a teacher? Not once. Expelling his entire class of potential heroes? Nope. He was beginning to regret this though. It wasn't often that an underground hero was requested for missions overseas. It was even rarer that the country the request came from was America. Nedzu had been the one to inform him of the unorthodox mission. He was standing at the principal's desk when Nedzu gave him the rundown of what was happening. A new pro overseas discovered a strange biological signature deep underground. A human signature. She said she could feel thousands of them. We don't know what's down there, but it isn't on any official records, and no one has been seen going in or out in the last 2 weeks. Where? Michigan. America? Why do they need me? They're concerned about what quirks may be at play here, if any. You're also not well known, so there's little chance of you being recognized. Are you willing? I'll give you the week off, paid of course. Aizawa mulled over it. It was risky. Unknown quirks and unknown circumstances. Recon had apparently turned up nothing, other than the fact that no one was seen going in or out. He'd have to fly out in advance to beat the jet lag. He didn't have a class anymore, so he wouldn't have to worry about that, but it was still high risk. I'll do it, but you have to inform the staff about the mission, in the off chance something goes wrong. Of course, I'll let you prepare and I'll have flights booked by noon. Thank you, Nedzu. Aizawa still wasn't sure why he agreed. He wasn't bad at speaking English, considering how long he spent with Mike, but that doesn't mean he was the best. Plenty of phrases and more obscure words were lost on him. The pro who'd located the underground facility was here. She looked far too young to be dealing with such a potentially deadly situation. He spent most of his time conversing with one of the pros who'd spoken to Nedzu about his participation. Mr. Smile or something like that. He didn't see the appeal. All right, listen up. We don't know what's in here, or what we are about to see, so get in, try to stay hidden, and get out if things go south. Got it? A resounding chorus of agreement rung out from the crowd of around 30 pro heroes. Great. Everyone to their posts. We go in 60 seconds. Aizawa was standing by what looked like a manhole, but was clearly not intended to serve as one. As the timer ticked down, he couldn't stop himself from wondering if things would go wrong. There could be absolutely anything down here. The facility wasn't on any official records. They could all be killed before they could say freeze. 4, 3, 2, 1. Move in. The man next to him warped the metal of the cover until it was wide enough for 2 to descend at a time. Lowering their rope ladders, they made quick work of entering. Aizawa and Mr. Smile were the first down, and Aizawa was in awe of how vast the building was. He looked down as they approached something solid. It was a light teal with the words Aperture Science printed onto them. He kicked the nearest plank of it and it fell in. He used his capture weapon to lower himself to the ground, looking around as he went. There were alarms blasting from speakers he couldn't see, and flashing red and yellow lights flashing all over the facility. He landed on the ground and found a boy. A teenage boy. He looked no older than some of the students he had expelled. The boy was looking at him like he had 3 heads. They made eye contact for what felt like ages, but was only a fraction of a second. Aizawa's eyes were drawn to the massive fucking robot behind the boy. Who are you? How did you find this facility? The robot had a voice. The boy jerked to face it, throwing up his hands, as if to block him from an attack. Wait, GLaDOS, don't hurt him. GLaDOS? Alright, Aizawa had no clue what the fuck he just dropped into, but he needed to get this kid out. He ran forward, grabbing the boy's arm. Green eyes stared at him in awe? Fascination? Aizawa didn't have time to come to a conclusion before a robotic voice boomed over the speakers. Activating neurotoxin pumps, chamber flood predicted in T-1 minute. Neurotoxin? Oh fuck no. Kid, we have to get out of here. The boy looked at him with something akin to disbelief in his eyes. As he moved to step towards him, he suddenly flinched. He looked to the robot in the middle of the room. GLaDOS? Something like that? I'm sorry. What the sh? This sentence is false. The yellow light on the face of the machine sputtered and turned off. What the fuck? Aizawa glanced at the green gas glowing from the vents, then at the kid. Hey, kid, we need to get out of here now. The boy didn't seem to hear him. Not an English speaker maybe? The speakers blasted again. Self-destruct imminent in T-minus 30 seconds. Shit. Kid, come on. Aizawa gripped the boy by his shoulders, shaking him lightly. The boy finally seemed to see him. Kid, listen to me, I'm going to get you out of here, but you need to listen to me, okay? The boy glanced at the monitors, eyes widening. He threw his arm up in an arc, firing something up beyond what Aizawa could see, and then pointing directly below them, and then they were falling, and then... In another part of the facility, the young pro was running around every corner, looking for the sheer thousands of people she'd felt, but she couldn't find a thing. The group she was with were getting anxious. The alarm blaring and the constant reminders that the facility would blow itself up weren't helping with morale. Turning another corner, she was met with corridors full of rooms. She couldn't feel anything, but she could hear something. Throwing open the door revealed a robot. The talking robot. Do you know who's here? A villain? An organization? Her name is Caroline. Caroline? One person? She's lonely. The alarms blared louder and louder as the last few minutes ticked down on the clock. Damn it. Grab the robot. We gotta get out of here now. Aizawa's ears were ringing, but he was alive. He wasn't sore, but he couldn't rule out injury yet. His vision was clouded with white, and the more he blinked, the clearer things got. He was lying on the ground, outside the facility. Fuck. He groaned as he pushed himself up. He looked around, trying to understand what had happened. The boy. He was lying next to him, unconscious but breathing. That was good. He shuffled over to him, gently nudging him. Kid, you need to wake up for me. Can you do that, please? Come on. The boy's eyes flickered, and in a beat the boy was on his feet, looking around. Aizawa didn't know what was happening. The boy looked up. Just up, and he was crying. He sucked in a deep breath, and smiled the brightest grin Aizawa had ever seen. Kid. Aizawa hadn't realized he'd swapped over to Japanese when the boy turned to him, still smiling. You speak Japanese? The kid tilted his head in confusion. Yeah. I'm Japanese, what else would I speak? Aizawa froze. Kid, do you know where you are? Well, I was just in there, aperture science, and now I'm here. Hopefully not too far from home. Kid, we're in America? What? America? Aizawa nodded. The kid looked confused. Okay, we'll worry about that later. For now, we need to get you to a hospital. There had been heavy casualties. Most of his group hadn't made it, either from the toxic gas or the explosion that followed it. Thousands of the people they detected underground perished. They just couldn't find them. The boy Aizawa had found was in plain sight, but the rest? They were anyone's guess. The boy, at least, was kind. Friendly, if not somewhat untrusting. Aizawa was asked to stay with him in the hospital, being the only Japanese speaker in the group, and that he'd been there with the kid. Said kid was playing with the blanket of the hospital bed. So, I can't keep calling you kid all day. Do you have a name? The boy looked to him, curiously. Oh, my name is Midoriya Izuku. Aizawa smiled, despite himself. I'm Aizawa Shoyuda, but I also go by Eraserhead. Midoriya had paused. Eraser? Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Yeah, why, have you heard of me? The boy just shook his head, looking a bit uneasy. Midoriya, I wanted to thank you for before. You saved me from the explosion, and I owe you a great deal of gratitude. Mind if I ask how you did it? Midoriya flushed at the praise, covering his eyes. It's really no trouble. I just did what any good person would do. But as for how? Midoriya lifted his hands from the blanket, holding them outstretched in front of him. Aizawa was eyeing him curiously as he moved, and he flinched when his hands started shifting. He idly wondered if he should have warned the man first. Once his hands had stopped moving, now replaced with makeshift portal guns, he shuffled closer to Aizawa, showing him his hands. What do they do? Midoriya aimed one hand at the wall and fired off a blue portal. He fired off an orange portal under a spare chair that was against the far wall, and watched as the chair appeared in front of Aizawa. He always loved the colors, and how they would shift and change as if they weren't fully there. Aizawa blinked, looking between the portals with interest. He plucked a notepad off the nightstand next to him, and threw it through the portal. He snickered as it fell through on the opposite side of the small room. Impressive. That's a cool power you got there, Midoriya. Aizawa reached out, gently holding his right hand as he examined the changes. He turned over his hand, and Midoriya flinched. It's a bad idea to look down the operational end. Aizawa dropped his hand. Really? Why? It could fry your retinas and possibly give you brain damage. Aizawa stared at him. That's kind of scary. Midoriya nodded solemnly. Yes, it is. A local detective had asked Midoriya some very basic questions, all in relation to what happened during the showdown, rather than everything else that was happening in that horror of a facility. Midoriya was flown to Japan to be treated in a different hospital. He told them he lived in Mizudafu before he was there, though he didn't remember how he ended up in America. The man, Aizawa, hadn't left him yet. It was nice. It had been so long since he spoke with someone other than GLaDOS and Ret. Speaking of, according to Aizawa, the other group who'd entered the facility found it. Yeah, it started talking and they assumed it was self-aware. It is. They weren't designed to be, but Ret is a special case. Ret? That's what I call it. I see. Another detective will be here soon. You want to have something to eat first? Yeah, that would be nice. Maybe something simple though. I haven't had solid food in, I don't even know how long. What? You weren't fed? Midoriya looked at him like it was obvious. I didn't need to be. When test subjects are frozen, the incubators would keep you hydrated and provide the nutrients you needed. It was to keep test subjects as healthy as possible while also saving funds. It wasn't that bad, to be honest. Just weird. I didn't really have time to be thinking about food. Aizawa looked at him with sympathy. Midoriya didn't want to think about it. Actually, I'm curious about something. Midoriya looked to Aizawa, who'd moved over to the window. He liked the window. Lots to see. He especially liked sunsets. He'd forgotten what it was like to watch them. Yeah. Back at the facility, you said something to the robot. What was that about? Oh, the paradox? Right, I should explain. So, the robot, GLaDOS, was an artificial intelligence. Their programming is supposed to compel them to find a solution to every problem they encounter. Are you following? Aizawa nodded along. Good. Basically, I fried her brain for a bit. AI can't resist thinking about paradoxes, so I just blurted out the first one I could think of. This sentence is false. Pretty simple, despite its paradoxical implications. I hadn't thought of that. I guess it makes sense. You know a lot about computers and such? Yeah, it was pretty much the only thing I had to keep myself entertained. It's an impressive skill to possess. Midoriya ducked his head, red to his ears. Thanks. Can I ask you a question? Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Why'd you ask if I spoke Japanese? You heard me speaking to GLaDOS. Aizawa paused. He hadn't noticed. He shifted awkwardly in his seat. I was flustered. Slipped up. I wasn't exactly clued in to what was going on down there. I made a rookie mistake, but you're safe, so it's in the past. Midoriya burst into giggles. Aizawa hid in his scarf. Midoriya laughed at him. Problem child? He whispered. The detective introduced himself as Tsukachi. He was working in the police force and was assigned to Midoriya's case. So, I'll be asking some personal questions as well as the normal. If you feel uncomfortable at any point, feel free to tell me, and we can finish this later. Are you ready to start? Yes, please. Alright, please state your name and age. I'm Midoriya Izuku, and I'm 13 years old. Midoriya noticed Aizawa flinch slightly. He probably wouldn't even have noticed if GLaDOS hadn't put him through so many concentration and observation test chambers. He didn't linger on the thought. Okay, please state your education history and your quirk. I went to Ashikaga Elementary and Middle School here in Mizudafu. I was in my second year when I ended up at Aperture. I wasn't there for the second semester. And can I ask what you mean by my quirk? Tsukachi looked up from his notebook. Aizawa was staring at him, an unreadable look on his face. What? What do you mean? Like, a habit? I guess I mutter a lot. I meant, as in your power. Power? I'm not a cartoon character. Midoriya chuckled awkwardly. Neither of the two men reacted. Both of their eyes were wide open. Am I missing something? Aizawa snapped out of it first. Wait, you said Ashikaga Middle School? Midoriya blinked, confused. Yes? Tsukachi flinched, having some kind of conversation with Aizawa with just looks and shifts. You're scaring me. What's wrong? Aizawa looked at him, his expression practically dripping with sympathy. It was freaking him out. Midoriya, you said you were frozen in the gaps between the tests? Midoriya didn't like the change of subject. Yeah. I don't know how much time passed in between each, but I know it was relatively close to each other after the first time. First time? Yeah. When I was first awoken after going there, it looked run down. I knew a lot of time had passed. Like, there was debris and plants and stuff. Even a few pigeons. Aizawa looked back to Tsukachi, poorly masked horror in his eyes. What? You're not telling me something and you're not being subtle about it. Kid Dash. No, tell me. Midoriya stared the man down, unrelenting. Aizawa sighed, and pulled up a tab on his phone. He turned it around for him to see. He paused. The screen read, Ashikaga Middle School, Ground Zero of the start of the first of the Quirk Wars. What are quirks? It wasn't a question. Aizawa sighed. Quirks are supernatural abilities possessed by 80% of the world's population. Do you both have one? Aizawa and Tsukachi nodded in tandem. Midoriya, this is really important. What year is it? Midoriya hesitated. I don't know. The last I remember it being was 2017? Aizawa nearly fainted on the spot. What year is it? Tsukachi pursed his lips, the pain in his eyes being so clear, Midoriya could feel it in waves. It's 2194. Midoriya immediately started crying. He didn't calm down for hours. Anytime he thought he might be able to breathe for even a second, he just thought about how his family died without ever knowing what happened to him. His parents, his brother and sister. He'd never see them again. Aizawa had been hugging him for the last 2 hours. The man was nice. He gripped the man's black shirt in an iron fist. When he had finally calmed down long enough to breathe, Aizawa pulled back slightly to pet his hair. Midoriya, you need to breathe and take a drink, you've lost a lot of fluid. Said boy hesitantly grasped the bottle of water he was being handed, sipping it slowly. I can't believe I was there for more than 100 years. Aizawa pat his head again. He tried not to lean into his hand. He failed. Aizawa sat next to him on his hospital bed. Tsukachi will be back soon. Is there anything you want to talk about before he gets back? Midoriya pondered it for a moment, wiping his eyes with the back of his free hand. I guess. What's the world like now? Aizawa hummed. You'll have to be a bit more specific. Okay, what is society like? What's the technology like? Is the internet still a thing? Aizawa chuckled. Well, society is built on the concept of heroes. Government-sanctioned individuals paid to save the public. Technology is, I don't know. I don't think it's as advanced as you might be thinking. We don't have flying cars or anything. And yes, the internet is a thing. Heroes? Like in movies? Yeah, that's cool. Tell me about them? Aizawa spent the next hour talking about heroes. Midoriya seemed really interested in quirks, and he had asked some very intelligent questions. Hold on a second, no one knows what his quirk is? The #1 hero in all of the world, and it's completely unknown. Yeah? I don't know why you're so interested. Well, because you just said all pro heroes have to have their quirks listed on that register thing. What's so special about him? It's not like his weakness is in the name. I don't know what to tell you, kid. I never thought too much of it. Midoriya huffed. Aizawa hid a smile. So, anything else? Aizawa? What's going to happen to me? I don't have a quirk. Am I supposed to tell people I'm quirkless? And what about school? I haven't been to school in years. And what about life in general? Where do I go? What do I do? Will the public know about what happened to me? What ash? Kid, you're rambling. Midoriya slouched. I'm sorry. I'm just so confused. About everything. Like, I don't know how I got to aperture, or how no one found it in the 100 years I was asleep. And now? I'm stuck here. I don't belong in this time. This century. It's freaking me out. Aizawa put a hand on his shoulder, gripping it. Kid, it's understandable that you're confused, and none of this is your fault. We'll cross most of those bridges when we get to them. The door opened. The two looked over in tandem. Actually, I think we can answer some of those questions. Tsukachi walked in with much more enthusiasm than when he'd left with. Midoriya's gaze, however, was fixed on the mouse, walking in behind him. I called Nezu on the way back, and he wanted to meet our friend here. Midoriya stared. Nezu smiled. It didn't make him any more comfortable. Yes. Aizawa, I'm glad the mission was a success. Aizawa noticed Nezu didn't mention the fact that they only saved one person and multiple heroes died in the explosion. He didn't feel the need to comment on it. Getting back on topic, Midoriya, right? The boy was awestruck, but nodded shakily. Nice to meet you, my name is Nezu, and I am the principal of the most prestigious hero school in the country. I was made aware of your special circumstances from Tsukachi, so I came up with some simple solutions, if that is all right with you. Midoriya nodded again, still staring. Aizawa elbowed him in the hip. The boy glared, but did snap out of his stupor. Wonderful. So, I'm aware that you haven't attended school after your first semester of middle school? Yes, that is correct. Now, while that isn't ideal, I happen to be very generous. Would you be interested in a catch-up class of sorts? It would be at UA, and I'm sure Aizawa wouldn't mind, right? Aizawa blinked. Of course, I could get the rest of the faculty to help you with mathematics and English. History should be focused on too. Nezu perked up. Speaking of history, tell me, would you mind filling in what we don't know? Many official files and records were lost during the Quirk Wars. Aizawa glared at the mouse. But I suppose we can cover that later on. As for living arrangements? Aizawa already agreed to watch you for the time being, but if you allow us to take a DNA test, we could see if we could find any of your relatives. Would you be interested in that? Midoriya was so... He didn't even know. He wiped his eyes again. He'd started crying at some point. Aizawa pat his back as he dried off his face. His relatives? It would be weird, but he wanted some shred of his family left. I'll do it, and Aizawa? As long as you don't mind, I would like to stay with you, please. Aizawa smiled in a comforting way. It made him feel better. Perfect, now we have that covered. There's just a few more things we should iron out. There was no footage, but there has been talk of you in the media. No name was released, but we are putting in a request that it stays that way. This for your quirk, I assume you would like to name it? Midoriya sat up, confused. I don't have a quirk though. Nezu's smile turned into more of a smirk. Oh, but you do. Look at your hands, you can create portals from an unknown power source. That sounds like it could be a rather impressive quirk. Midoriya hesitated. He could make it his own. Make these changes his. He liked the sound of that. I guess it could, but I don't know what I would even call it. Aizawa tilted his head. Sometimes staying simple is easiest. You could just call it Portal. Okay, Portal it is then. Tsukachi nodded and wrote something down in his notebook. Nezu took a few steps forward. Alright, the last thing we must discuss. You aren't on any government records. I took the liberty of checking on the way here, and nothing came up. We could put you into witness protection, but there doesn't seem to be a point in that. We could explain your case to some government officials. I'm sure they wouldn't mind forging some records for you. Midoriya lowered his eyebrows. Is that legal? Nezu chuckled. Why no? But considering your circumstances, it would be irrational of them to refuse. So, what do you say? Okay, my birthday is July 15th. Can I keep my name? Nezu nodded. Excellent, no, we have that covered. I'll let you get back to your conversation. Midoriya waved Nezu out, and smiled weakly at Tsukachi as he departed. Once the door finally closed again, Midoriya slumped heavily, sighing. Hey, cheer up a bit, kid, considering the way things went, I'd count this as a win. It's not that I'm not happy, it's just worrying. If the government knows I'm from before Quirks, are they going to want to test me? I don't want to be tested again. I won't be. Hey, relax. We're not going to let that happen. Do you want to head out? You're being discharged in about 15 minutes. Midoriya nodded, shifting to get off the bed. The car ride to Aizawa's apartment was quiet. Midoriya spent most of the drive looking around. At one point, he saw a group of people with strong mutation quirks, and he pretty much didn't breathe until they'd long since passed them. Once they'd arrived, Aizawa kicked off his boots, strolling through the room and face planting onto his couch. This is nice. It's modest, but it's kind of a mess. Midoriya looked around at the pristine room. A mess, you say? Aizawa pushed up into a sitting position, looking around the living room. It was spotless. His eyes widened. Oh. Midoriya's head snapped back to him. Oh? What does that mean? There was a loud clang from the kitchen. Midoriya watched as Aizawa got up. What's happening? Did someone break in? No, way worse than that. What? What's worse than a break-in? Midoriya looked back to the kitchen when he heard a voice. It was a man, singing? Midoriya had no idea what was happening. The singing stopped. Shoyuda? That you? You're late. Aizawa looked even more dead inside than normal. Midoriya was fearing for his life. The unknown man's voice rang out again, even louder than before. The door to the kitchen swung open, and Midoriya watched as a man in a lot of leather and bright yellow hair emerged, holding a big plate of something or other. It's date night. There you are. The man broke into a scream when he saw Midoriya. His head snapped over to Aizawa. Shoyuda? Husband, light of my life? Why is there a teenage boy in our apartment? Midoriya snickered at Aizawa's face. He looked constipated. Aizawa sighed heavily when Midoriya burst into giggles. Hisashi, this is Midoriya. You know, the boy I saved on the important mission. The one that I told you I'd be watching for a few days. Aizawa's tone was dripping with sarcasm, and Midoriya had to cover his mouth as he laughed harder. He was bent over, clutching his side. Hisashi, as Aizawa had called him, robotically placed the full plate down, walked to another room in the apartment and returned a few moments later in more appropriate clothing. Of course. What's up, listener? I'm Yamada, but you can call me whatever, Hisashi, present Mike, whichever you prefer. Midoriya chuckled, but still shook the man's outstretched hand. Nice to meet you, Yamada. Thank you for having me. Midoriya bowed, and Aizawa sighed. Did you not get my message? Yamada turned to his husband. No. I left my phone at the agency, but I was told you'd be back tonight. I figured I could at least make you dinner. Midoriya snickered again. At least you say. Yamada turned to the boy, smiling. You tell a soul, and they won't find your body. Midoriya smiled sweetly. Try me, bitch. The two broke off into uproarious laughter. Aizawa threw himself back onto the couch. Oh God, there's two of them. Shut up and get your ass over here, I made you dinner. After a delicious meal, Aizawa presented Midoriya with a shirt and some sweatpants. To replace the jumpsuit, Midoriya belatedly realized he'd never changed out of it. He made quick work in the shower, not wanting to spend too much time looking at his body. When he reappeared in the living room, Yamada and Aizawa were on the couch, an awfully chubby cat lying across their laps. You guys have a cat? Yamada chuckled. Yep. She's really sweet, but her last owners overfed her. We're helping to get her back into shape. Midoriya kneeled down in front of the cat. She blinked at him before meowing. She wants you to pet her. Midoriya raised right hand. About an inch before her fur, he hesitated. My hands. Aizawa's eyes widened. Hey, I'm sure it'll be fine. Just be gentle, and if you think you'll hurt her you can stop. Midoriya bit his lip, lifting his hand once again. She purred loudly when his hand reached her back. He giggled to himself. See? She loves you already. What's her name? Aizawa and Yamada made eye contact, smirking. Well, funny story. I call her Bastard, and Yamada calls her Chonk. She responds to both, so we just stuck with it. Midoriya laughed to himself. I think I'll call her Chonk. Yamada let out a quiet whoop. Told you, you owe me a coffee. Aizawa rolled his eyes. Chonk leapt onto Midoriya's head. He fell back, laughing. She got comfortable on his chest, and he stopped moving. You can never move again. Midoriya smiled. Yeah, I think I live here now. When Midoriya woke up, he was in a bed. A really, really soft bed. He sighed and tucked his head into the pillow. Hero. Midoriya blinked. Looking up, there it stood, watching him. Brett. You're okay. They found me. I'm so glad. When did you get here? Earlier. I was dropped off. Midoriya nodded, yawning. He stood up, patting Rhett. Walking past, he made his way through the apartment. In the kitchen, he found Yamada making coffee. His long blonde hair was hanging by his waist. "You have really long hair." The man startled, turning. He smiled when he saw Midoriya. "Why thank you. I've been growing it out since high school." Midoriya walked into the kitchen, leaning on the counter. "Really? Why is that?" Yamada shrugged, pouring an ungodly amount of sugar into one mug. "I don't know. I thought it would look cool, I guess. And it does. I've been gelling it up for a while, and I started getting so many compliments." Midoriya grinned. "Speaking of long hair, you aren't looking too shabby yourself." Midoriya touched his bushy hair. It was getting long. It was almost halfway down his neck. "Huh, I can't believe I never noticed." Yamada laughed, patting his shoulders. Whatever. It looks cool." "Here, turn around." Midoriya complied, waiting for the man to do whatever it was he was doing. He felt a brush running through his notoriously curly hair, and before he knew it, Yamada pat his shoulders again. "There you go, one stylish ponytail, just for you." Midoriya looked in the mirror Yamada had just presented to him. "That actually looks nice. Thank you. Don't mention it, and I think it suits you." Yamads turned back to the coffee while Midoriya stroked Chonk's fur. "Hey Midoriya? Mind bringing this in to show Yuta for me?" Midoriya looked to Yamada, who was holding a coffee mug outstretched to him. "Oh, yeah sure." Aizawa was asleep. Or, very good at pretending. Midoriya didn't know what to do. He put the mug down on the nightstand and started poking the man's face. Nothing. He tries tickling him, but alas, the man wasn't ticklish. Finally, he sat on Aizawa's stomach. That got a reaction. "Christ kid, how much do you weigh?" Aizawa pushed him off and sat up. "I don't know. Maybe heavier than most other 13-year-olds? Aizawa hummed, sipping the piping hot coffee. Midoriya said a silent prayer for his taste buds. "Okay kid, I'm awake. Want to go to UA today? We could get a head start on your catch-up work." "Okay." I didn't really have any other plans, anyway. UA was insane. It was so big. So modern-looking. So Midoriya tried taking it all in as he walked through the massive metal gate. There were hedges and trees and a few ponds. He could see training areas littered all over the campus, but the main building was by far the most impressive. "Whoa, how many floors are there in here?" 5. Oh. It was after 9, so there were no students loitering about. He was glad about that. Aizawa wasn't sure he wanted Midoriya to meet so many quirked people at once. The boy was entertained, at least. "This place is so cool. No wonder it's the top school in the country. Top hero school." Midoriya rolled his eyes playfully. "Whatever. So what will I be doing first?" "I was thinking we could start with Japanese, just to make sure you still know how to write and read and whatnot. After that, Ectoplasm said he'd help with mathematics, and Nedzu wanted to do science with you." "Speaking of Nedzu, what is he? Is that a quirk?" Aizawa huffed out a laugh. "Nah, he's a cryptid. And it's not a mutation quirk, but he does have an intelligence booster quirk." "Interesting." Midoriya, Aizawa realized, must have been at the top of his classes before Aperture. He had a wide vocabulary, good penmanship, and was eager to learn more. Ectoplasm had told him the boy was at a much higher mathematics level than predicted. Around second year of high school level, he'd said. That had been interesting? Concerning? Either way, he was waiting for Midoriya in the staff room when he bumped into Midnight. "Oh, Aizawa. You didn't tell me you were back. I thought Nedzu or Hizashi would have mentioned it already." "Nope. It's good to see you again. Now, tell me all the details. Do we have to do this now? I'm waiting FO-. Aizawa? You in here?" Midoriya spotted him from across the room. "There you are. Nedzu said I'm done for the day. Are you ready to go?" Midnight stared at the kid. Black and green hair. Green eyes. "Show Yuta, you son of a bitch, you didn't tell me you had a son." Aizawa choked. Midoriya was howling laughing. "Oh, I like you, what's your name?" "So forward. I'm Midnight. I went to school with Shoyuta and Hizashi. I basically set them up. Then I thank you for your service." Midnight laughed, putting an arm around Midoriya. They both watched as Aizawa failed to compose himself. Oh God, this was a bad idea. Are you kidding me? How else would I become? Midoriya Izuku, Midoriya's favorite aunt. Already electing yourself the favorite? Awfully bold of you. Oh, you little punk, I love this kid. Aizawa sighed, walking towards the door. All right, I guess I got to go. See you tomorrow? Midnight smiled. Obviously, see you later, kid. Midoriya followed Aizawa out of the school building. The two were walking in companionable silence. Midoriya allowed his mind to wander as they made their way across the courtyard. It scared him how fast things changed. He went from a hamster in someone's maze to a person. Just like his old life had been, plus a few key factors. His talk with Nezu had been frightening at best. There was so much of human history that they'd forgotten because of some wars over superpowers. The idea of a war starting, not because of power-hungry maniacs, but because of supernatural gifts made him worry for the state of the world. Were quirkless people shunned? Was there a lasting resentment from those blessed with quirks? Midoriya, very briefly, was thankful for the odd power he'd come to possess. He knew he wouldn't want to grow up an outsider in a world full of specials. He looked at his hand, watching as it shifted back into the portal gun. Idly, he thought he might as well be quirkless. He knew the portals could only be cast on the hospital room. He'd cast portals onto the walls. Going by what GLaDOS told him, that shouldn't have happened. He stopped in his tracks. Aizawa kept walking a few paces before he realized Midoriya wasn't following him anymore. He watched him, curious. Aizawa, back at the hospital, did I actually make portals or did I dream it? Aizawa looked concerned, but responded anyways. You did. You showed me. You made a chair fall through the floor and have it land beside me. And I threw a notebook through one. Is everything all right, kid? Midoriya hesitated. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. Was it all right? It shouldn't be possible. So, what happened? Out of curiosity, he shot a portal at the ground in front of him. It appeared. The blue glow was highlighting his face, and he could see Aizawa looking at it. He cast the orange portal on the concrete under a fallen branch. The branch fell and rose up in front of him. He grasped it in one hand. I shouldn't have been able to do this. Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Midoriya turned to one of the many trees lining the courtyard. He shot a portal at it. Nothing happened. He shot the same portal back on the concrete in front of him. It opened. He shivered, letting his hands shift back. He dropped the branch. Can we go? I don't want to think too much about this. Aizawa put a hand on his shoulder. Midoriya hadn't realized he had come over. Yeah, we can go. Are you sure you're okay? Yeah, I'll be okay. I just need to do some research. Midoriya slammed his head into the desk again. His research had hit a serious roadblock. Is this how GLaDOS felt every time a test subject died? Midoriya rubbed his head and stood up. After face planting on his bed, he turned to Rhett, who'd been silent for the last while. Hey Rhett, why can't I figure this out? I spent forever in that facility, and I'm no closer to understanding how the technology works. It's literally inside me and I genuinely don't know how it operates. Does that make me an idiot? Rhett made a few clicking noises. Midoriya smushed his face into his pillow, fully intended on having a long nap. Moon rocks. Midoriya shuffled from his hard-to-breathe position. GLaDOS told me that already. Moon rocks, ground up into powder or whatever. What are the odds of moon rocks being everywhere in Japan? Rhett beeped. Midoriya had come to understand that this particular beep meant it was unhappy or annoyed. What? Composition? What composition? Moon composition? Rhett clicked again. What kind of rock is the moon? Midoriya pondered it a moment before pulling out the phone Aizawa had gotten him. It wasn't the newest model by any means, but Midoriya still loved it. He'd taken an unexpected selfie with the tired man and immediately set it as his screensaver. A quick search revealed that the moon was mostly made up of volcanic rock. Basalt, to be specific. Midoriya hummed. Curious. He turned back to Rhett, who was following his movement up until then. Thanks, buddy. It's not a concrete answer, but at least I have a lead. Rhett made a happy chirp, and the light of its eye turned off. Midoriya made his way back through the apartment to the kitchen. He'd been really awkward at first. He felt like he was invading on their space, but Aizawa, and Yamada specifically, made it clear they really didn't mind watching him. He was still a bit uncomfortable, but considering his last living arrangements, he was 1,000 times better off. Aizawa was in the kitchen, pouring some food into Chonk's bowl. Didn't Yamada feed her already? Aizawa looked like he blue-screened. He slowly turned to him. Did he? His voice was scarily flat, and his eyes showed no emotion, but his fists projected the clearest message. Someone is about to die. Midoriya snorted to himself, moving past Aizawa to take the bowl away from a meowing Chonk. She'd get over it, but he always hated upsetting her. I'm going to kill him. Midoriya rolled his eyes. No, you won't. Aizawa dumped the bag of food back to its designated resting spot in the closet. No, I won't. Aizawa moved back towards him, leaning on the counter. So, did this research of yours prove useful? Midoriya sighed. Kind of? I don't know. I have an idea, but it'll take a hell of a lot of time to prove it. Aizawa shrugged. It's better than nothing. Well, I have Ret to thank for that. Aizawa shifted where he stood, and Midoriya followed him as he walked to the couch. Once they were both comfortable, Aizawa spoke up again. Speaking of your talking robot buddy, could you explain what it is to me? I'm just a bit lost. Oh, of course. Red is what's called a turret. At Aperture, they were used during certain test chambers to add an extra layer of difficulty to the problem. Okay, so why do you have one? Well, that's different. I don't know how, but it became self-aware. See, turrets are only supposed to inconvenience the test subject. They're full of bullets, and their only objective is to blast anything that moves. I'm not feeling that confident about welcoming one into my home. Midoriya chuckled. Ret isn't going to shoot you, or me. See, I knew Ret was different because we had a conversation. Turrets are only programmed to have a certain number of sayings that are activated depending on the circumstances. For example, if I was spotted by a turret, but ducked out of view, they would say, "Are you still there?" It's hella creepy, but you get used to it over time. Aizawa nodded, still looking a bit uncomfortable. Do you not want me to keep Ret in the apartment? The man shook his head, and Midoriya let out a small sigh of relief. That's not the problem I'm having here. Kid, I'm sorry that you went through that at all. Midoriya shrugged, feeling a bit uneasy. It's whatever. It happened, it's in the past, I don't want to think about it too much. Midoriya dashed. I don't want to talk about it. Aizawa held eye contact with him for a few painstaking seconds, but finally turned, exhaling. Okay, I won't force you to, and I don't want you to think I'm pressuring you into answering, but you know you can talk to me about what happened, right? Midoriya let out a breath, leaving back into the couch. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry for snapping. It's my fault, I shouldn't have pushed you. Midoriya tapped his thighs for a few quiet minutes. Aizawa? Yes? Could we? I don't really have clothes. Could we? Aizawa snapped his head up. Oh shit, yeah. Let's go. Right now? Aizawa was already holding his car keys, toeing on his shoes. Yeah, better now than never. Midoriya huffed, but followed him out. The mall was packed. Kind of. There was a fairly big crowd. It was still more people than Midoriya had seen at one time in forever. He caught himself staring at some of the more standout mutations for far longer than what would be considered socially acceptable. Aizawa clearly noticed, and every time his eyes would wander for too long, he'd get an elbow in the side. It worked though, so he wasn't complaining. There were so many places they needed to stop at. First they bought a shit ton of graphic shirts and pants. Enough to last him a while. They got socks and some hair ties at another shop. After a few hours, Midoriya had gotten enough outfits to last until winter, and enough socks to choke a hungry hippo. Was that still a thing? Aizawa? Yeah. Have you heard of a game with hungry hippos in it? Aizawa looked at him like he'd grown an extra head. I'll take that as a no. Can we stop here? I want to get some stationery and things. A stack of notebooks and colorful pens later, they were hungry, tired, and in need of a break. The duo stopped to get a late lunch at a quaint coffee shop. Midoriya got a hot chocolate. Aizawa requested coffee strong enough to kill a horse. So, is there anything you want to chat about? Midoriya raised an eyebrow. You're not great at small talk, huh? We're talking, aren't we? He raised his hands in mock surrender. Alright. I'll give you that. Anything you want to talk about, Aizawa? Yeah, actually. Do you have any idea of what you want to do after all this? That gave the boy pause. I haven't really given it much thought. I mean, are there even the same careers as when I was younger? Aizawa chuckled lightly. For the most part, I'm gonna hazard a guess and say yeah. There are some professions that I don't think you would have had. Oh, like what? Well, the main one being heroes, obviously. But there are jobs associated with heroes, too. Like support heroes, the people who develop tech and strategies, and members of the Hero Commission. Heck, even some kinds of doctors are new. Midoriya blinked. New doctors? Quirkologists? He nodded, somewhat out of it. Man, things are so normal? I don't think I could ever get used to all this, even if I had been born into this generation. I feel like I'd never get bored. Aizawa hummed, stirring his coffee. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. That's partially why lots of people become heroes. To keep life interesting. What's it like? Being a hero? Midoriya nodded, giving the man his undivided attention. Well, it's hard. Not to say it's difficult, it is, but it's taxing. Emotionally. Sometimes raids or missions just don't work out, and sometimes you can't save people, so it's hard. It can be liberating at times. Heroes are allowed to use their quirks whenever, and a lot of people are fond of that. If it's such an attractive career choice, why don't more people go for it? Good question, kid. It's a mixture of competition and ease of entry. Being a spotlight hero means, naturally, you have to fight for attention. Being a good hero means nothing to the media if you're not in the public eye. You're constantly competing with and being compared to your peers. It's all one big popularity contest. That's why I prefer to stay underground. Midoriya nodded along, clearly invested. And as for ease of entry? It's not easy to get into a hero school. Wait, speaking of hero schools. There's schools set up to train children. Well, when you say it like that, it sounds a lot less glamorous. But you're right. There are hero high schools all over the country, like UA, set up to train children into heroes. UA is a bit different, though. Most schools only offer a hero course, like Shiketsu, while UA has the support course, the business course, and Gen Ed. Interesting. So support and business are associated with hero culture, but Gen Ed is, what? Just to offer a normal course as well? Honestly, I don't know why we offer a general course, but I'm glad we do. If Gen Ed hadn't been a thing, I wouldn't have gone to UA. Midoriya did a double take. Wait, what? What are you talking about? My quirk is not combat-oriented. I got into the hero course later in the school year. Oh yeah, I meant to ask about that. What is your quirk? Aizawa activated it for him. His eyes flashed crimson, and his hair floated up around him. I'm not sure what I'm looking at. The man let it drop. Right? He reminded himself, the kid didn't have a quirk. It's called erasure. Basically, I can cancel someone's quirk for as long as I keep my eyes open. The floating hair and red eyes are just part of it. Midoriya's eyes shined with curiosity. That is so interesting. No wonder you're a hero. Your quirk is literally perfect for one-on-one fights. Not to mention it's good for de-escalating situations. I'm confused though, why would it matter if your quirk isn't physical? Aizawa sighed, taking a long drink from his coffee. It was far too weak for his likings. Well, the UA entrance exam is unfair. Easy as that. There's the written portion as well, but that's more of a formality than anything else. The practical side of the test is made for students with powerful quirks to show off in combat. But if you don't have a physical quirk? Midoriya took the cue. You're being set up to fail. How is that fair? Aizawa sighed deeply. It isn't. Netsu has tried to have it changed hundreds of times, but the Hero Commission has to agree with what we do. Every time we send in a new idea, they shoot it down. Out of spite, we added a method to get points without wrecking robots, but we can't tell the students. It's not much better, but it's something. Midoriya pondered the implications of such an exam as he finished his now cold drink. Aizawa paid, and the two were off again. They didn't linger too long, and it was getting late, so they made their way back to the apartment. After putting away all the bags, they sat down on the couch again. Yamada still wasn't back yet, so they were going to wait before starting dinner. Hey kid? You know you never answered my question earlier. Question? About what you want to do with yourself? Midoriya looked off into nowhere. Chonk was purring happily as he stroked her fur. I think I want to be a hero. Aizawa felt himself smile. A noble path to take. Midoriya smirked. Aizawa's sweat dropped. And thank you for telling me exactly what to do to pass. Aizawa smacked himself. Oh, you little bastard. Midoriya burst out laughing as Chonk looked up expectantly. Training with Aizawa was hell. The man was strong and well-versed in martial arts. As much as Midoriya loathed to admit it, he should probably learn some form of self-defense. If he was in a situation where there was nowhere to land his portals, he'd be inconvenienced, but not beaten. GLaDOS made sure he was able to think around problems like that. Aizawa had complimented his strength in passing, clearly not wanting to linger on the subject too much. Midoriya appreciated the effort, but he knew exactly why he was physically in shape, whether he wanted to think about it or not. Quirkless sparring, Midoriya came to find, was quite cathartic. He didn't like hurting people much, but against an opponent who could defend themselves? It was nice to let off some steam. That, and it was funny seeing Aizawa's reaction to being beaten every once in a while. Aizawa gradually stopped holding back as much, and Midoriya got more confident in his moves. It was a win-win really. Plus, it was a good way to pass the time. Between his catch-up classes at UA and trying to figure out why his portals could be placed outside the facility, he didn't really do much with his day. It's not like he had friends to spend time with, or any of the extracurriculars he used to take. Aizawa didn't mention it at any point, so Midoriya just didn't tell him. He might regret that in time, but he didn't really feel up to spilling his guts out. Either way, he was distracted, and Aizawa knocked him off his feet. His weird, metal, sturdy feet. It had been fun to show the man how much force they could withstand. It was the only modification she'd explained so far, and Aizawa had nearly passed out when Midoriya dived off the roof of the apartment block, only to land in a crouch. Aizawa had flinched, expected the sickening crunch of at least 20 bones, but nothing happened. The boy had stood up, laughed it off, and went back to jogging. Wait, jogging? Aizawa had him run around a lot. Since he asked the man to train him, really. It had been a few months, and Midoriya had come to enjoy jogging as much as sparring. Kid, you have to focus on the fight if you don't want to bruise your tailbone. Aizawa's tone was light, but Midoriya still flushed with embarrassment. Sorry, I was just thinking. As you should be, the entrance exam is coming up soon and you need to be on the top of your game. I just don't want to kick you around like a football when I know you can take me down in a fight. Midoriya's smile slanted awkwardly. He wasn't used to receiving compliments. He basically got one from GLaDOS during his entire stay, and he didn't really remember many conversations he'd had before Aperture. Thanks, but I don't think you should give me that much credit. Aizawa raised an eyebrow and leaned back into a fighting stance. About 5 grueling minutes later, Aizawa was in a chokehold. He tapped out. Midoriya only felt a little bit guilty. See? There's the crazy strong kid. Keep your head clear and you'll do great. Midoriya took a long drink of water, panting in between sips. Thanks, but you don't make it easy. They finished up fairly soon after, and Midoriya was whisked off to Nedzu's office for a chat and some class. His classes with Nedzu had started out as science, but had quickly derailed. They mostly worked on whatever Nedzu was curious about, and there was a lot that the mouse was curious about. So your school's curriculum was actually ahead of the current first years? Curious. It makes me wonder why a middle school had more advanced classes 100 years ago. I don't know, but it wasn't easy by any means, we just had to get through it. Nedzu hummed. And what about society? Were there many notable events in 2017? Midoriya sipped his tea. When weren't there notable events? So much happens in such a short space of time. England was in the midst of trying to leave the EU, global warming was becoming a major issue, and there was a crazy big hurricane in America. Hurricane? Yeah, Ophelia, I think. How interesting. Tell me, what do you know about the world wars? Pre-Quirk era, obviously. World Wars? Oh, well, the first one was because some guy was shot, and it lasted from 1914 to 1918. Germany was given most of the blame, and then Hitler came into power after it. He caused the Second War, but he killed himself towards the end because his enemies were closing in on him. And what years did that war range from? Oh, 1939 to 1945. Why do you ask? Well, when the Quirk Wars were raging, many official documents and databases were destroyed. It pains me to say that the humans lost a lot of their own history. Midoriya's eyebrows lowered. The humans? That's an odd way to phrase it. Nezu chuckled. Ah, I see the confusion. I myself am in fact not a human. My apologies for not telling you sooner. Oh, I thought you just had a mutation quirk or something. But what does that make you then? In this day and age, quirks are more common than no quirks. In the last 2 decades or so, some animals have shown to possess quirks as well, though it's far less common. I happen to have a quirk that I call high specs. I have a far more developed brain than most animals, and I am more intelligent than plenty of humans. Animals with quirks? Wow, that is so disturbing. Nedza stalled. Disturbing? How so? Well, did animals have quirks before humans? As far as we are aware, no. Right? So where did animals get quirks from? Surely if animals and humans had all the same requirements, they would have developed at equal rates. Nedza didn't like where he was going with this. I'm not sure. May I ask what your point is? Midoriya sighed deeply. Okay, have you ever heard of how syphilis started circulating? It was only present in llamas, and not humans. But when Columbus returned from America, he had contracted it. Nedzu was shaking from anger or mirth. Midoriya couldn't tell. So, you're suggesting that humans are the reason some animals have quirks? Well, that's not how I would have said it, but sure. It's still cool that other animals can have quirks, but I just hope to whatever fucking deity might hear me that they didn't come from humans. Nedza tried not to snort. Well, thank you for this enlightening conversation, Midoriya. I'll let you get back to Shoyuta now. And Midoriya? Good luck in the exam. Thanks, Nedzu. Midoriya was buying milk. Easy as that. He and Aizawa had walked home, only to discover that Chonk had broken into the fridge and knocked the bottle off of RHE's shelf. The smug feline had looked directly at them as she lapped up the milk that had spilled absolutely everywhere. Aizawa had briefly looked like he was ejecting his soul from his body, before snapping back into action. The man picked up the hefty cat and dropped her into a cardboard box they had lying in the hall. The front of the box had been scrawled on in black marker. Imprisoned for her crimes. The first time Aizawa had dropped her in it, Midoriya had felt bad. Now, he giggled as she meowed at them. Aizawa had started mopping up the milk in a painful circle with an old mop-looking thing. It was clearly ancient, but Aizawa refused the tissues and cloth Midoriya offered him. He'd requested the boy make a quick run to the local market. It was a 5-minute walk away, but Midoriya was still nervous. It was his first time leaving the apartment by himself, or at least, without Aizawa or Yamada keeping an eye on him. Before, he probably would have complained about them practically stalking him, but he was actually happy for the company and the fact that it made him feel safe. He swore it would be a quick shopping run. In and out in a flash. He paid for the milk and began the walk back to the apartment when he heard an explosion from a few streets away. He looked in the direction of the apartment. I have a few minutes to kill, I guess. Aizawa had told Midoriya that villain attacks were very common. They had stopped to watch 1 or 2 in the past, mostly so Midoriya could make note of the quirks and fighting styles, but they never lingered. There were already so many other people converging in the street. He let his feet carry him to the corner, where the crowd had gathered. It was difficult to push through all the onlookers, but he shouldered his way to the barricades. There was a massive thing. It reminded him of Swamp Thing, or one of the comic book villains he used to love. It looked like a massive ball of sludge. There were a few pro-heroes already at the scene, but he noticed that none of them were really doing anything. There was a boy. Midoriya froze when he saw blonde hair poke out from the side of the sludge thing. He's drowning. The man next to him spared him a glance before turning back to the fight. Why are they not doing anything? A woman to his right turned to him. He idly noticed she was holding a microphone. None of their quirks are that helpful in this scenario. It's unfortunate, but they're waiting for a better suited pro. He turned back to the boy. His face was visible from the nose up, his mouth and nostrils coated in what looked like the mouth of the sludge thing. He pried his blood-red eyes open. Midoriya stilled. They made eye contact, but it felt like the boy wasn't really seeing him. He pushed the milk into the arms of the man next to him, with a brief mutter of "hold this," before vaulting over the barricade. He outran Death Arms and ducked right as a slimy tendril flew at him. He threw 2 portals, one in front of him, and one on a wall above the sludge villain. He thanked his lucky stars they both landed. Throwing himself through the portal, he landed on the sludge freak, gripping his eyes in his hands. "Hey, you bastard, never look down the operational end of the device." The sludge guy screeched and writhed, trying to get his eyes out of the boy's grip. He threw out the blonde, unintentionally, Midoriya presumed. There was a gasp from the crowd, and next thing Midoriya knew he was being hauled to the side by a hella buff guy with ridiculous yellow blonde hair. "Do not fear, for I am here." The dude punched the slime thing, blasting it in a massive gust of wind. Once everything calmed down, Midoriya heard the same guy from the crowd. "He changed the weather?" He looked up. There were now, in fact, rain clouds. "Spooky." The man raised a fist, and the crowd started cheering his name. "All Might! All Might! All Might!" Oh, Midoriya thought, the #1 hero. He stood up and brushed himself off. Glancing around, he met the eyes of the blonde he'd saved. The boy was just staring at him. Midoriya raised a hand in an awkward wave. The boy just looked more lost. Midoriya immediately got defensive. Probably a mistake in hindsight. "What? Never seen a guy with prosthetics? You ableist piece of shit?" The blonde blinked a few times, still not saying anything. Midoriya shrugged, grabbed his milk from the guy in the crowd and walked back home. Or he at least tried to. The second he grabbed the bottle of milk from the rando in the crowd, one of the pro heroes who'd done jack shit decided it would be a good idea to drag him over to the curb and give him a lecture. Not only did Kamui Woods and Death Arms praise his quirk, they told him that, though he was reckless, he did save they boy, Bakug, he was told. "You're lucky All Might got here in time, or you would have to relay this whole thing to the police." Midoriya blinked. "Actually, I have a question." Kamui stood up a bit straighter when Midoriya took a step closer to him, while Death Arms just raised an eyebrow. "So, public quirk use is like, illegal, right?" The both of the men looked caught off guard. Kamui cleared his throat awkwardly. Yeah. It's common knowledge." Midoriya closed his eyes, taking a deep breath before exhaling angrily. "So you two are saying that I should be facing charges, but I'm not because of, what, favoritism?" Death Arms puffed out his chest. "Hey, we're letting you off easy. Be thankful and leave before we have to do our jobs." Midoriya stared at him. He'd faced authority figures far scarier than this man, and the press was literally 2 meters away from them. So, Midoriya thought, in the immortal words of that one dude, "What ya gon' do? Your jobs? As in, your jobs as government-sanctioned weapons? Heroes aren't allowed to make official arrests, and I thought your job was to protect civilians. I didn't see you stopping that slime prick." Kamui kept glancing in the direction of the cameras, and the crowd that was paying a lot more attention to them. Death Arms' sweat dropped. "Hey, show some dash. Respect? You expect me to respect you when you let that blonde kid nearly drown? Harsh, I didn't realize heroes prioritize their own safety over the safety of others." Kamui's gaze snapped back over to him. "Whoa, that's out of line." "Is it? There were plenty of things you could have done to help him. You could have gotten Mount Lady to scoop up the slime dude, or gotten that hero with the water quirk to dilute the slime. I'm just saying, you should be able to think on your feet." Midoriya smirked at their faces. He knew the press had their cameras pointed directly at them now. Now, let's celebrate this win, shall we?" Midoriya started when a large hand landed on his shoulder. All Might was standing tall and proud behind him, smiling so wide it looked kind of painful. The two pros sighed in relief, while Midoriya just shrugged. "Good work, my boy, but in the future, please allow the pros to do their jobs." Midoriya rolled his eyes. "Not this again." All Might seemed to be confused by his reaction and didn't expect Midoriya to brush his hand off his shoulder. As he was walking away, he ignored the calls of the pros and brushed off the stare of Bakugo. The sun had started to set over the horizon and the wind had started to pick up. Midoriya was lugging the carton of milk as he made his way home. It didn't sit right with him that the pros would blatantly ignore protocol. What? Because he was objectively powerful? It didn't make sense. Why would a world with such incredible powers and abilities have such blatant, twisted disregard for the law? Don't get him wrong, he may have jaywalked once or twice before Aperture, but letting someone get off easy because of perceived objective strength? It just didn't sit right with him. Midoriya kicked a pebble on the path, watching as it bounced once, then twice before settling. He sighed, rubbing his eyes. Abuse of power was not a foreign concept to him. There were plenty of corrupt people from his era, but he didn't expect it to be as bad more than 100 years later. The thought gave him pause. More than 100 years had passed since his own generation. He idly wondered what came of his close friends. His parents. His sister. He wondered if she had children who would never know about him. He wondered if his parents ever had more children. He sighed again. He hadn't let himself think of his family in the past few months. It wouldn't lead to any good. Well, Midoriya wiped his eyes. He was never going to see them again. Never feel the warmth of his mother's hugs, the melodic sound of his sister's laughter. His father's gentle hair ruffles. Never speak to any of his friends again. He briefly thought about what they all were told when he disappeared. Were they told? He blinked more tears from his eyes as he approached the apartment. He sighed, psyching himself up. He threw open the door, plastering on a fake smile. What the fuck? I asked you to get milk and 2 seconds later you're in the middle of a villain attack. Midoriya blinked at the forms of Aizawa and Yamada standing side by side, opposite him. He shrunk under the deadly glare. Well, would you believe me if I said that I was contacted by the FBI? Try again, problem child. Midoriya snorted at the nickname. Yamada kept glancing between them. I had bought the milk, and when I started making my way home I noticed a puff of smoke and a crowd gathering 2 streets over. I guess I got carried away, but the pros on site weren't doing anything. The boy was going to drown in that disgusting slime prick. So, what, you just decided to run in regardless of the consequences? Midoriya blinked. Yeah, pretty much. I didn't really think about it. The boy needed help. He looked right at me. I couldn't just leave him to drown. Plus, it's not like I got reprimanded in any way. The pros berated me for all of 3 seconds before fawning over my quirk. One guy even said that he was going to let me off easy. Entitled shit. Aizawa looked unsettled by the language. Yamada giggled under his breath. Aizawa elbowed him in the gut. Midoriya huffed. Anyways, I started chewing them out in front of the crowd, and suddenly they're sputtering about how I should be thanking them for ignoring the due process of law. I thought I was getting the hang of all of this. This place, this time, but I keep losing track of all the differences. The other day I straight up forgot I left Aperture. I nearly passed out when I saw Rhett. I'm trying to comprehend everything that's changed, but I am just so confused. The 2 men recoiled at the outburst. Aizawa stepped forward, reaching for him. He stepped out of reach. Aizawa pretended he wasn't hurt by that. Look around. There are people, honest-to-goodness people, who are hurt or worse because of some asinine power that they aren't even allowed to use in public. People look like something straight out of the cartoons I watched as a child, and I am trying so hard to understand and fit into this whack-job society, but I can't. Midoriya scrubbed his face, avoiding eye contact with both men. Aizawa glanced to Yamada, his eyes screaming, "What the fuck do I do?" Yamada gestured to Midoriya, a patting motion that looked similar to giving someone a huo. Aizawa tugged the broken boy into his arms, squeezing him lightly. Midoriya lasted about 4 seconds before throwing his arms around the tired man, gripping his hoodie in an iron fist. Look at me, please. Midoriya sniffled, resigned to his fate. He pulled back just enough to look the man in the eyes. Midoriya, I know I'll never understand, but I can empathize with you. I know you hate having to live like this, But realistically, you are going to be stuck here for a really long time. And Yamada and we just want to help you. All of the people aware of your case want to help you. Midoriya pulled out of Aizawa's arms to face him head-on. I don't hate this era, but it isn't mine. And this is not my Muzutafu. Look at you, both of you. You're able to stand in the present and say, this is who I am, this is my home, and I have never known anything else. I don't know who I am from one day to the next. 1 second I'm just me, the next I'm a test subject, and then suddenly I'm being thrust into a world I don't belong in. I know I'm a lot of trouble, but I have genuinely enjoyed staying with you both. Please don't take this as me not being grateful for helping me. Aizawa looked down. Yamada pulled him into a hug. He squeezed him tightly. Midoriya pondered, briefly, about how comforting both their hugs had been. Warm and tight, but not constricting. Just like his mother's. Nope, stop that right this instant. He sighed. I know I haven't been the most forthcoming about what I went through or what my life was like before, but I want to tell you. I owe it to myself to tell you. The two men exchanged a glance before seating themselves on the couch. Midoriya took a deep breath and he just let it all out. He told them about the first test he could remember, not knowing where he was or why. He told them about GLaDOS and her experiments. He told them about how he could hardly remember anything from the year leading up to his entrapment. He told them about his love of music and theater. About his family. He was out of tears when he finally got around to the hardest part to explain. The modifications. I've already showed you my hands, but they do more than just shifting between a portal gun and actual hands. See, the original portal gun had this really interesting and confusing function where you could just pick things up. Like, it basically negated all of its gravity. I couldn't explain it if I tried, so I'll show you. He knelt in front of the coffee table, his right hand outstretched. He watched as it changed shape yet again, and literally plucked the table from the floor as though it had no weight at all. Aizawa couldn't help but notice the 3 light blue beams that connected the gun to the table. Yamada watched on in fascination as Midoriya moved the table about, showing how the weight had no effect on his arm. He dropped the table back to the floor, standing up once again. As for my legs, well, Aperture Science developed the portal gun, but they also had to make sure that test subjects wouldn't permanently cripple themselves using it, so they developed a pair of boots that could absorb insane amounts of force. By that I mean you could survive jumping off a skyscraper as long as you landed on both feet. GLaDOS kind of gave me those. As far as I know, I don't have any of my lower legs anymore. It wouldn't surprise me if she just cut them off. He lifted the leg of his sweatpants up to his knee, where the stark white of the prosthetic ended. The prosthetics were shaped somewhat weirdly, but in comparison to that one guy he saw with literal engines in his calves, he wasn't that badly off. He breathed out sharply. He hadn't spoken this much consecutively in forever. It was refreshing and draining at the same time. What else? Well, my eyes. I don't know why, to be honest, but she replaced them with these. I can zoom in to an extent, see in the dark, and my personal favorite, they glow on command. Aizawa's eyebrows flew up. Midoriya snickered at his reaction. Here, I'll show you. He flew over to the light switch, flicking it off. He mentally flicked on the switch to his eyes, watching as Yamada and Aizawa's eyes snapped to him. He knew what they looked like, and it was kind of unsettling. It made his eyes look black outside of his irises. Spooky. When he was satisfied with their reactions, he flicked back on the light. And that's pretty much all I know. I'm sure there's other stuff, but GLaDOS was cryptic at the best of times. The only thing I know is that I have this weird thing in the center of my abdomen. He lifted his shirt up to the odd, white disc planted firmly in his chest. It was around half the size of his palm and gleaming white against his scarred, pale skin. He really needed to get more sun. Aizawa eyed the disc suspiciously. He rolled his eyes, letting his shirt fall. It's fine, it doesn't hurt or anything. Aizawa relented, leaning back in the couch. Thank you for sharing this with us. We will be talking about this again, and not to undermine the importance of this conversation, but I got a text from Nedzu a little while ago. Midoriya raised his eyebrows. He pointed out that we forgot about the requirements for application. Midoriya instantly assumed the worst. Surely, Nedzu would not let him apply? Was it his lack of a quirk? Perhaps his age? Technically, he was a good 150 years older than all of the others. What ABO? Kid? Midoriya snapped out of his muttering frenzy, sheepishly throwing a smile to the exhausted man. He pointed out that you need to have your middle school exam results. Oh shit, don't tell me Dash. Aizawa sighed sharply. Yes, you will have to sit exams in-house. Luckily for you, the closest middle school is a 5-minute walk from here. Really? I'm surprised you wouldn't want to live closer to UA, but I guess I get it. Yeah, anyways, I'll call the school tomorrow and ask them to set up an extra table for you. Oh, and by the way, the exams are next month. Midoriya closed his eyes, breathing as evenly as possible. Of course. Wonderful. Brilliant. I have 1 month to study like 6 subjects from start to finish. I guess I should get started already. Which school will I be held hostage in? Aizawa snorted. You will be fine. And it's called Aldra. It's not the best school, but it's local and the tests are regulated. Midoriya nodded, thanking him and heading to his room. Yamada turned to Aizawa. Shoyuda? I think we should get Tsukachi to find any of Midoriya's descendants. He had a sister, maybe she had children. I don't know, I think it might be good for him. Aizawa glanced in the direction of his room. Yeah, I'll give him a call in the morning. Midoriya was ready for his exams. Well, as ready as you can be when you have to relearn an entirely new curriculum of the same junk he had already studied. The last thing he wanted was to spend more than a day in some stuffy school filled with teenagers who wouldn't get his humor, but alas, there he was going. He'd decided to wear something low-key. He didn't want to draw attention to himself, but mostly he didn't want people staring at his hands. It wasn't necessary, he knew, but he didn't want to talk to people if he could avoid it. The long sleeves and gloves may have been a bad call, in hindsight. By the time he arrived at the gates to the dreary school, he was already sweating. He looked at the looming figure of the school as he made his way inside. The whole building looked shady, but it was probably underfunded, so he let the thought go. The lady in the office directed him to the classroom, and he took a long, deep breath before opening the door. The atmosphere in the room was weird. He immediately noticed that he was the last one to arrive, if the single empty table was any indication. He ignored the students' lingering gazes as he approached the teacher, who somehow hadn't noticed him yet. Hi. I'm Midoriya. I was told I'd be taking my exams in here. The teacher was an older man, graying and drawn out. His gaze fixed on Midoriya with something akin to disdain before it shifted to surprise. Midoriya handed him the note Aizawa had given him, and turned to make his way to his seat. It was in a weird spot. He expected them to slap a table in the front, near the door. Instead, he had to walk past aisles of teenagers who would not stop staring at him. He dumped his bag on the floor, fixing them with a glare. He would admit that he was surprised by their reactions. Some turned as soon as he made eye contact, while others looked like they were looking through him. He rubbed him the wrong way. While he was looking around the room, he noticed the only person not looking at him. A spiky-haired blonde. Oh, he thought. The sludge villain guy. Midoriya shifted in his seat. He'd called the guy ableist. Would you look at that, he was facing the consequences of his actions, who would have thought? He couldn't help but notice the teacher looking pointedly between himself and the boy. Bakugu? Was that his name? He shook off the thought as the man started handing out the first of the exams. He flew through it, writing down an answer for every question in record time. While he was waiting for his paper to be collected, he glanced at the students that kept looking at him, even during the exam. The teacher clearly didn't care about the misconduct, preferring to stare at Bakugu, who was shaking. Maybe he's not an exam kind of guy. After his third exam, they were given a half-hour break for lunch. He waited for everyone else to start filing out before he approached the blonde. Bakugu was gripping his desk like it owed him money. Mildly concerned, Midoriya didn't get any closer. Hey, Bakugu, right? Bakugu froze in his seat. Listen, I wanted to apologize for calling you ableist. It was rude of me. Bakugu didn't react in the slightest. It was like he didn't hear him. Hello? Anyone home? Whatever, I don't care. Bakugu still didn't look at him, but he responded, so Midoriya counted it as a win. As he made his way back to his table, he finally examined the old wood. It looked off, like someone had scraped off the top layer and slapped some varnish on instead of buying a replacement. He didn't like the vibes he was getting from the school, the students, heck, even the teacher. He couldn't wait to get out of there. Just 3 more tests to go. He ate his lunch quickly and spent the last 5 minutes pretending to check something on his phone. As students started filling back in, he paid more attention to the looks being thrown at him. And Bakugo, for that matter. It was like they were waiting for something freaky. When he completed the last exam, he turned in his paper and made to leave a good 20 minutes before anyone else. He bowed to the teacher as he passed, muttering a thanks for having me. As he opened the door, he examined the students again. For the first time all day, Bakugo looked at him, only to jerk back when he made eye contact with him. Midoriya left without a word. It was definitely one of the weirdest things he'd been subjected to in quite some time. Yamada greeted him as he arrived home. Once he was seated in his pajamas, he typed his password into his computer. A quick search of Aldra Middle School, Mizudafu, pulled up some news sites reporting on various things, like an old villain attack, a fire, and most recently, a suicide. Midoriya blinked at the page in shock. A boy his age. He pursed his lips. It was hard to read about things like that, and he started to understand why there was such a dark atmosphere in the class. A thought struck him. Had he sat in that boy's seat? He shivered at the thought. He knew he hadn't been disrespectful, but he couldn't help but feel bad. Closing the tab, he put it out of his head as he made his way back to the living room. Aizawa. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice. Aizawa sat down across from the detective. Of course, what can I help you with? Tsukachi lay his briefcase on the coffee table between them, pulling out an assortment of sheets. It took a while, but I got everything you asked of me. Let's see here, his new birth certificate, some information about his health, and a list of relatives we could find. Aizawa perked up a bit. Perfect, please enlighten me. Well, his birth certificate was a lot easier to make than I'd actually thought. According to an agent I spoke with, it's a lot more common than people think. His date of birth, as he requested, was kept the same, and we had to make up some parents. They guaranteed no one will question it, so I guess we'll have to trust them on that. Aizawa nodded, eyeing the certificate with scrutiny. Looked real. It kind of spooked him a bit. Next, the DNA test we ran on him revealed that he's actually 15, not 13 like he thought. In fact, his body seems to be a bit advanced for his age. I suppose it's as normal as it can be, considering what he went through. The test confirmed that he is healthy, but we noticed one strange thing in his DNA. Aizawa raised an eyebrow. He has quirk factor? Aizawa recoiled slightly. Quirk factor? But he shouldn't have anything close to it. Did they confirm anything else about it? Does he have a quirk he doesn't know about? Tsukachi looked at him sympathetically. Yes, I'm afraid it's hard to say, conclusively, why he has quirk factor. They couldn't figure anything else out, to my knowledge, but it's likely. We can't check his toe bones because, during his physical examination, his doctor found that he has 3, as opposed to 1 bone. It's mind-boggling, really. Aizawa took a deep breath through his nose. This was going to take a hell of a lot of time to explain to the kid. Midoriya already had enough on his mind, what with the entrance exam coming up and his research into why his portals work. Okay. Anything else? Tsukachi held up the last sheet. His relatives. We found files on his mother and sister, but nothing about his father or his brother. Brother? He had a brother? Tsukachi looked up in surprise. He didn't mention him to you? No? I mean, he doesn't really talk about his family at all, but he's mentioned his parents and his sister offhandedly a few times. Tsukachi scratched his chin. That is odd. But getting back on track, we found his mother's file. She died 3 years after he can last recall seeing his family. It was logged as natural causes, but I'm not sure what they were. As for his sister, she apparently was put into a foster system for a few years, before settling down herself. So you're saying? Yep, she had children. We managed to track down Midoriya's closest living descendant to a Midoriya Inko. Lucky for us, she lives in Mizudafu. Unfortunately for us, she lost her son recently. We did get into contact with her and she said she'd be more than happy to meet him. Wait, you told a civilian about what happened to Midoriya? I thought Nedzu didn't want us spreading that information. He doesn't, but he agreed that it would be best if she was in the know about him. And you're sure she'll be alright to meet him? When did her son pass? Tsukachi hummed. File said it happened 10 months ago. Aizawa pursed his lips. I'm not sure it would be healthy for her to meet him under these conditions. Tsukachi sighed, rubbing his brow. Normally? I'd agree with you, but she seemed so excited to meet her uncle? Great uncle? I didn't have the heart to disappoint her. I just don't want her to attach herself to him. She's mourning, and I'm worried he'll remind her too much of him. Tsukachi nodded, exhaling. Maybe we should ask Midoriya first? Aizawa sat up in the seat. That's not a bad idea. Thank you, Tsukachi. Midoriya stretched in his room. The entrance exam was in mere hours and he was nervous. Attempting to burn off some excess energy, he did some lunges and toe touches. Retsai followed him as he started pacing around the bedroom. He triple-checked his bag to make sure he had what he'd need for the written exam. You'll do well. Midoriya glanced at the turret. You have a lot of faith in me. Ret clicked, annoyed. Midoriya huffed and reached out a prosthetic hand to pat its head. Hey, I'm sorry. I know you've been right about the future more than a few times, but this is completely up to me. Before, your predictions relied on other people, but now it's all on me if I screw up. Ret blinked. Midoriya sighed, standing on tired legs. All the excess energy left him. He relaxed his shoulders and took a deep breath in, calming his heartbeat. Alright, I'll see you later, buddy. He threw his bag over one shoulder and made his way to the kitchen. Yamada was rooting around in the fridge. Midoriya looked into the living room. No Aizawa to be seen anywhere. Morning, is Aizawa still asleep? Yamada started when he spoke. Slamming the fridge door closed, he turned to him. Nope, he had a meeting with Tsukachi this morning. He left around a half hour ago. Something wrong, little listener? Midoriya exhaled as he grabbed some bread to toast. He didn't think he could stomach anything heavier with his nerves. Nothing's wrong, I just assumed he'd be bringing me to the entrance exam. Yamada perked up a bit. Oh, no worries, I'm bringing you. Plus, I'm presenting so I kind of have to be there early. Let me just change and we can head out, okay? Midoriya nodded and sat down to eat his plain toast. Even though they were early, there were hero hopefuls as far as the eye could see. Yamada had dropped him off a few blocks from UA so no one would see them together. He started ambling in towards the school where he would, hopefully, train to be a hero. He glanced around at the other teenagers around him. He felt weird. He hadn't interacted with people his age in, at least 100 years. He was not looking forward to his attempts at conversations. He spotted Bakugu a few meters ahead of him. He hadn't thought the boy would be interested in heroics when they'd interacted. His foot caught on the pavement and he fell forward. Of course, he thought, just my luck. He let muscle memory take over as he cast 2 portals onto the path, falling face first into one and popping out upright from another. Oh, that was so cool. He flinched at the announcement. He spun around and came face to face with a girl with brown hair and large brown eyes. That's such a cool quirk. What do you call it? Midoriya put on a polite smile. Thanks, I just call it portal. She grinned and started walking with him. He pondered what to say. Are you nervous? I sure as hell am. Her smile waned a bit, but maintained its happy glow. Yeah, I have a lot riding on this. I hear that. She looked at him curiously. So, you worried about the written exam? I hear it's pretty difficult. He hummed, scratching his neck. Kind of? I don't know. I really hope they don't make it too unfair. Yeah. Here's hoping. They approached the administration table to sign in and collect their exam ID. Oh, that's disappointing. We're sitting in different sections. He glanced at her card then back to his own. Yeah, they wouldn't be able to sit together. He might have to talk to more people. Damn, that's annoying. But look, we're in the same exam arena. She smiled. I guess I'll see you there. Good luck in the exam. Said his goodbyes and made his way to the room his written exam was to be held in. The exam was difficult. There were plenty of knowledge questions, but the last half of the exam was all about morality and how to behave as a hero in bad situations. It made him uncomfortable. When he was in Aperture, other than the companion cubes, there wasn't much morality attached to the tests. Just do or die. It was all about collecting data. Statistics. He didn't like thinking about it. He completed it either way and followed the crowd to the auditorium. Making his way to his seating block, he glanced around to see if he could spot her name. He didn't ask her name. Goddamn it, of course. He fell into his seat next to a purple-haired boy who looked like 90% sleep deprivation and 10% caffeine. Hey. The tired boy next to him didn't respond. Oh. Never mind. Purple eyes met his green ones. He raised an eyebrow. Midoriya noticed how scrawny the other was. Really lanky. Alt-talts no muscle. Curious. The boy broke their eye contact. He reminded Midoriya of a cat. A bitchy cat that wouldn't give you attention except under mysterious circumstances. Kind of like Chonk, except Chonk immediately wanted attention. He grinned. I like you, you better get into the hero course. The other boy looked at him like he'd grown a second head. He faced forward, muttering something under his breath. I didn't quite catch that. I said I have no chance? Midoriya blinked. Then why are you here? Shit, that was way too blunt. Although, the other didn't get angry. In fact, he didn't react at all. I'm here because I want to be. I guess you do have a chance then. Huh. Midoriya grinned again. Fake it till you make it. If you act like you were born for this, you'll start believing it after a while. Improvise. If in doubt, make it up. Purple Boy looked at him with open curiosity. How is confidence supposed to help me destroy robots? Midoriya pursed his lips. Not everyone has a physical quirk. Surely the test wouldn't allow a somewhat fair alternative, even if it is completely biased. What? Midoriya sighed. I'm saying, how likely do you think a hero school is to turn away a student who's being heroic? The boy's eyes widened minusculely. Midoriya pointed finger guns at him. I'm Midoriya. The boy stared at him. Shinso. Midoriya's mouth tugged into a smile. He was about to say more when the lights went down. Yamada, all dressed up in his hero costume, strutted to his spot behind the podium. What's up, listeners? Everybody say hey. Midoriya didn't hesitate. Hey. Apparently he was the only one. His voice echoed around the auditorium. The silence after his shout was deafening. Shinso snorted next to him. Midoriya threw a half-hearted glare his way. Yamada deflated. Thank you to that one examinee. Alright, let's get into the rules. All of y'all will be divided into groups for each exam arena, where you will destroy robots for corresponding points. If I may draw your attention to the screen, you'll see the 1-pointer, the 2-pointer and finally, the 3-pointer. The bots get harder to beat depending on their point value, so the 1-pointer is easier to beat than the 2-pointer, and vice versa for the 3-pointer. The amount of points you get will determine whether or not you get into the hero course. Moving on-ish. A tall boy with navy blue hair shot up out of his seat. Excuse me. I was examining the pamphlet we were provided and I couldn't help but notice you left out one opponent. This is a terrible lack of attention to detail for the top hero school in the country. Yamada looked at the boy over the rim of his sunglasses. Thank you, examinee. That particular bot is worth 0 points. It's just supposed to be an obstacle. It's not unstoppable, but it's not worth anything, so I wouldn't recommend wasting time on it. The boy nodded sharply. Thank you. Yamada paused before continuing his presentation. Alright, if you all check your exam IDs you'll see what exam arena you've been assigned. Please make your way slowly and calmly to your designated bus. Thank you all for listening. And remember UA's motto when times are tough. Almost everyone joined in as Yamada yelled. Go beyond, plus ultra. Midoriya got the second bus out to his exam arena. Upon arriving, he looked around for the nice girl he'd met earlier at the entrance. Oh man, that's a lot of people. He slowly made his way to the comically oversized gates. Looking around, he was met with hundreds of nervous, unfamiliar faces. The amount of people was staggering. Aperture popped into his head again. The loneliness was enough to drive you insane. The only reason he could keep his wits about him was the fact that GLaDOS spoke with him frequently, even if it was just to insult him. Seeing so many people in one spot freaked him out. Back when he was at the mall with Aizawa, It was more fresh. He was blatantly ignoring the sheer amount of people milling about, rather noticing their quirks as opposed to registering them as humans. Looking back, that probably wasn't the best way to deal with what he was feeling. He almost wished he'd walked right into someone. He threw up his hands in apology. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going." The boy he'd bumped into, the blue-haired boy from the auditorium, turned to him. Standing at his full height, he towered over Midoriya. He gulped. "As a prospective hero student, you should pay attention to your surroundings. Please be more careful." "Sorry, I zoned out. I didn't know." The taller boy blinked at the apology. "Zoned out? Are you all right?" "Huh, if only you knew." Yeah. "I'm just nervous." The blue-haired boy nodded, agreeing with him. He opened his mouth to say something when Midoriya looked at his grotesquely oversized calves. I've seen you before. Your legs are massive." Midoriya internally cringed. "Huge legs? Come on, Izuku." The glasses-clad boy looked momentarily taken aback, before smiling crookedly. "Massive is an interesting way to describe them. They're engines, it's my quirk." Midoriya looked at them in awe. "That's sick. Do they need fuel, or does your body just naturally produce enough juice to keep them going?" He internally chuckled at the idea of this straight-laced guy drinking motor oil or something. "Oh yes, actually. They run on orange juice." Midoriya blinked. He let out a breathy chuckle. "So literally juice, that's wild." The boy raised an eyebrow, amused. "I must apologize, I misjudged you earlier. I assumed that because you weren't paying attention, you weren't serious about being a hero." "Don't worry about it. I'm kind of awkward, sorry. No need to apologize. Amita, by the way." "Midoriya, nice to meet you. How are you feeling about the practical?" "I'm not too worried. I'm confident in my skills, and the flat roads are perfect for my quirk." Midoriya paused. "Flat roads?" Ida halted his hand chopping. He covered his mouth with a rectangular hand. "I'm sorry, my older brother told me to keep it to myself, but I let it slip. My apologies." "It's fine, but what did you mean?" Ida sighed, disappointed in himself. "My brother told me that the entrance exam is usually set in a pseudo-town, with streets and alleyways." "Oh, thanks for the info." Ida nodded sullenly. "Hey, I was looking for my friend who's also in this arena, but I'll see you around. I hope to see you in school." Ida perked up a bit. "Of course, don't let me distract you." "Oh, to see you as well." Midoriya grinned, taking off towards the gates again. The last few buses were arriving, so he knew he had to hurry. He cursed his height as he searched, hopping every once in a while to see over the sea of students. As he approached the gates, he finally spotted the brunette. "Hey, I was getting worried I wouldn't find you. I'm Midoriya, by the way." She looked up from her stretch, surprised, before breaking out into a grin. "Hey, I'm glad you found me. I'm Uraraka. I'm really nervous. What do you think the test will be like?" Midoriya patted his chin. "I don't really know. The guy with the big calves over there said it was like a street or something." Uraraka first pumped, letting out a little whoop. "Is it that great?" Uraraka waved her hands back and forth awkwardly. "Don't get me wrong, it'll probably be hard, but my parents are construction workers, so I had a lot of stuff to practice my quirk on." "Construction, huh? Hey, you wouldn't happen to know what basalt is used for in construction, I mean?" Uraraka lit up. "Oh, yeah, it's used in most construction actually. Like tarmac and concrete. I don't know exact percentages, but I know it's a significant amount." Midoriya nodded to himself. "Thanks." Uraraka waved off the sentiments. "Why do you want to K-dash? Go!" Midoriya jerked violently, eyes snapping to present Mike on top of the gates, that were now open, as his legs instinctively carried him forward. He rolled his eyes as he sprinted around the first corner. A few one-pointers were lined up, approaching him. He threw two portals, one on a high building and one on the floor in front of him. Using this momentum, he fell onto the first robot, crushing it under his shock-absorbent legs. Grabbing a metal sheet from the broken one-pointer, he stabbed it through the second and third, before ducking away from the fourth. He repeated the same portal formation, kicking the head off the fourth. He landed, taking a deep breath. That's 4. For the next few minutes, he dashed around the arena, bashing bots as he found them. The 3-pointers were tricky, but he found that knocking them over made it easier to wreck them. He passed 1 or 2 people who seemed overwhelmed by the bots, so he made an attempt to help them all. One guy with black hair helped him deck a 3-pointer that cornered a short kid. He threw him a thumbs up before running off again. As the clock counted down, he ran into the main street. There were smoldering carcasses of wrecked bots littered everywhere. He passed Ida, smiling and waving as he flung himself through another portal. It felt nice, using his portals so freely. His training with Aizawa was fun, tiring, but fun. The thing is though, he didn't really ask him to practice his portals. It was weird. He shook out of his thoughts, flying and landing firmly on his boots. He stood up straight, looking around. As he went to take another step, the ground suddenly shook violently. He was thrown off his feet, shaking aggressively. Is this an earthquake? What's going on? That's when he saw it. The massive, hulking beast that was the 0-pointer. Taller than the 4 to 6-story buildings surrounding it. Oh fuck you Aizawa. Yamada. You bastards couldn't have warned me? For a split second, it reminded him of the biggest turret he'd ever seen. The chill that tore its way down his spine was enough to shock him enough to move. He started running in the opposite direction, happy that his boots gave him a bit of a boost. He cast his portals ahead of him, one on the road in front of him and one far off towards the end of the road. As he neared the portal, ready to jump through, he heard a scream. He halted in his steps. Uraraka. He spun around, looking for her among the debris and fleeing students. He saw Ida, who had also turned at the noise. He spotted her. OFE. He threw his portals, and hopped out by the massive pile of debris that Uraraka was buried under. Midoriya. He struggled with the first massive slab, flinging it off to the right. Hey, I'll get you out. Can you move? She tensed for a moment, cringing. I think I twisted my ankle. He grimaced internally. It would be hard to get her out by himself. He glanced behind him at the gargantuan robot approaching them. He saw movement in his peripheral vision. Ida. Hey, Ida. Said boy's eyes snapped to him. Can you help me out? Ida tended in his stance. He glanced at his wrist, presumably at a watch. What are you doing? Come on. The boy jerked in his spot, before firing up his engines. In the blink of an eye, he was opposite Midoriya, struggling to lift the next slab. They heaved it behind them, trying to get a grip on the last slab. Midoriya cursed at its weight. It's too heavy, Uraraka? What's your quirk? She looked at him, curiously. Oh my god, I never told you. It's anti-gravity. That's lucky. You think you can get this off? Uraraka dry heaved for a second, taking a deep breath. I can try. She held her breath as she pressed all 5 fingers to the concrete trapping her. It lifted off of her, and the 2 boys gently pulled her out of the rubble. She let the debris fall back to the ground as they took off in the other direction, the 2 boys lifting her together. The 0-pointer slammed its foot right where Uraraka had just been trapped. What the hell, that could have crushed you. Uraraka looked to Midoriya, before glancing back. She paled. As they pressed further on, the alarm sounding the end of the exam blasted throughout the arena. They came to a stop, breathing heavily. Is anyone injured? I heard quite a few yells during that exam. I don't want any of you going home hurt. Midoriya watched the old lady walk among the students. She was using a comically large needle as a walking stick. That's mildly alarming. I really wish I wasn't terrified of needles, because otherwise I'd probably find that hilarious. Ida got her attention, and she tended to Uraraka's twisted ankle. He said his goodbyes, trading numbers and well wishes with the both of them. As he made his way out the school gates, he pondered what he'd do if he didn't get in. He had stopped keeping track of his points when he helped the first guy. Hey, Midoriya. He turned at the call. Hey Shinso. How did you find it? Shinso looked. Actually, Midoriya wasn't sure. The other boy was hard to read. I don't know. I took your advice. Tried to help as many people as I could. Midoriya was flattered. It's not every day a complete stranger takes advice on a life-changing situation. Hey, don't look so glum. plenty of heroes got in through Gen Ed if you were worried about your score. Shinso nodded. Yeah, I applied for that as well. Not missing any opportunity. Midoriya bumped his shoulder with his fist. I have confidence you'll get there. Shinso looked at him funny. Why? Midoriya grinned. Let's just say I like you, and I have pretty good intuition. Shinso shrugged. So, can I text you? Shinso looked like he'd been caught off guard. Sure. They exchanged numbers and went on their individual ways. Midoriya was happy with himself. 3 whole people wanted to interact with him. And they were all his age. Yamada picked him up where he'd dropped him earlier that day, and they chatted about the exam as they went. Yamada opened the door to their apartment. Surprise! Midoriya jerked back at the announcement. He looked over the faces of Aizawa, Midnight, and Netsu. Huh! Aizawa walked over to him, holding a... The cake is a lie. He flinched. So your DNA test came. You're 15. We figured you should have a party, even just to make up for lost time. Midoriya smiled. What was that? He enjoyed a slice of chocolate cake as his teachers chatted amongst themselves. What a nice way to end the day. So, how did the exam go? Midoriya looked up from his second slice of cake. It was so delicious. So moist. Pretty much everyone had left at that point, not that there were many in the first place, but Midoriya didn't mind. He wasn't really close with that many people. He wasn't stupid enough to ignore that. He wiped the crumbs from his mouth as he leaned back on the couch. Chonk made herself comfortable on his lap, purring as he stroked her back. It was hard. A lot of morality questions I wasn't expecting. Although, I realize now it was inevitable. Not everyone who has the skills to be a great pro hero would be the best of the best intelligence-wise. Not too bad, I like to think I did well. Aizawa nodded, thanking Yamada when he was presented with tea. The yellow blonde scooted next to Midoriya on the couch. He perked up. I'd like to thank you for being the ONOY student with the decency to respond to my amazing speech. I was trying to get everyone pumped up. You know. Midoriya chuckled. Aizawa raised an eyebrow in confusion. Midoriya liked to think that he was getting better at reading the man. It was hard, no doubt, but he had a few set reactions. Ingrained. Maybe it was a bad thing that Midoriya never mentioned how easy it can be to tell what he's thinking sometimes. During our special talk in the auditorium, Mr. Present Mike here thought it would be a good idea to try call and answer on a bunch of anxious teenagers. I, of course, don't have a fiber of common sense, so I was the only one that actually responded. Aizawa snorted. Yamada glared at him. It was awkward, not funny, Shoyuta. I was a laughing stock. I'm old. It's official. I can't connect with the kids anymore. Midoriya smirked at the man's antics. Yamada, I'd say it was more about nerves than your performance. Don't worry about it. And if it makes you feel any better, I'm older than you, and I connected with 3 whole kids. Aizawa blinked, satisfied about something or other. Yamada wailed. You're not older than me. At least, not properly. I'm old. Midoriya patted his back sympathetically, still trying to hold back giggles. Aizawa clearly had had enough of the conversation. And the practical exam? Midoriya's glare took on an icy tone. You pricks didn't tell me the 0-pointer was taller than a fucking building. Yamada choked on his laughter. Aizawa was trembling with mirth. Sorry, but I had already told you more than I should have at that cafe in Kiyoshi Ward. Midoriya rolled his eyes, smiling. I'm kidding it just? He thought of the chill that went through him, reminding him just how real it was. Like the gargantuan turret. Giant red eye. He shook his head to disperse his thoughts. Eyes, he mentally corrected himself. The 0-pointer had more than one. Crumbs. Caught me off guard. The 2 men exchanged glances, clearly noticing his pause. Well, we can't say much about your results until next week, but I was watching with the other teachers. I have to say you impressed them. And me. Midoriya shrunk under the praise, scratching his cheek to try and relieve some of the awkwardness he was feeling. Thanks, but I didn't really do much. In fact, I completely lost count of how many bots I wrecked. And helping others wasn't exactly planned either. Aizawa smiled a little, nodding. They were specifically impressed when you and that Ida boy helped the brunette. Midoriya looked up from Chonk. Knowing when to ask for help is a noble trait to have, Midoriya, especially as a pro. Yamada patted his head. He smiled before his face turned pensive. The man ran his fingers through Midoriya's hair, readying the small ponytail he'd grown. I had a question actually. I thought your portal hand things could cancel gravity. Midoriya raised an eyebrow. Yeah, I did say that. But it's on objects, not just in general. Right? So, why didn't you use it to get the debris off the girl? Wouldn't it have been faster? Midoriya pondered the question for a bit. If he was being honest, he hadn't given it much thought in the moment. Well, I don't know. In Aperture, so much of what I did was instinct, I didn't have time to give it more than a second of thought. But even so, I never used it on anything other than Aperture Science branded storage and companion cubes. I don't really know if there's an upper limit to what I can carry. I guess my instinct was to take the safest option, just in case. Yamada nodded, eyes wide. Midoriya didn't talk about aperture much. He knew bottling it up was a bad idea, but the idea of opening up about it would mean reliving all the tests. One after the other. The surgeries. He shivered at the thought. As if sensing his sudden discomfort, Yamada clapped his hands, a small, comforting smile on his face. Well, it is very late and Aizawa wanted to talk to you, so I'm going to skedaddle. Good night. Midoriya turned to Aizawa, who was wishing the yellow blonde a good night's sleep. Is something wrong? Aizawa turned to him again. Not really. I was speaking with the detective this morning, and he told me some things you may be interested to know. About you and your family. Midoriya visibly tensed. He really didn't like talking about his family. Especially to Aizawa and Yamada. They had basically become his new family since he got out of Aperture. Since he escaped that nightmare. Hey, it's nothing bad. He found you, your mother, and your sister's records, but I'm sorry to say he couldn't find anything on your father or brother. Midoriya nodded. He both did and didn't want to know more. A stab of guilt went through him at Aizawa's hesitance. His brother? What's there to say? He had so few memories of his family upon thinking about it, but for some reason his brother is absent from all of them. It painted him to even think it, but he barely remembered his face. Aizawa was still talking, so he tried to pick up on where the conversation had gone. The DNA test came back, as I said earlier, and Tsukachi found your records, including medical files. There was a lot on it. Midoriya chuckled to himself. It wasn't even funny, but he just felt so weird about everything. His life was so ridiculous. Yeah, I broke a lot of bones as a kid. I guess you could say I didn't know when to quit. Aizawa raised an eyebrow, amused. He reached for a briefcase leaning against his seat, pulling a few files out. He flicked open the one on top and stopped on a photo. Is this an X-ray of your leg? Midoriya looked up, tilting his head. Aizawa turned the photo around to him, showing off his lower leg in all its former glory. Yeah. Aizawa examined it for a moment, before turning it to him again. You see your pinky toe? You have 3 toe joints? Midoriya just looked at him for a moment. Yeah. Aizawa huffed. Kid, these days most of the population only have one. Midoriya blinked. Please say you're messing with me. I wish I could, kid. In fact, most doctors say you can tell if you have a quirk or not by the number of bones in your pinky toe. The green-haired boy felt his brain shut down. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply through his nose. Wow. Midoriya glanced at the other files on Aizawa's lap. A name immediately caught his eye. Aizawa? Can I see the files? Aizawa looked at him for a second too long before nodding. Midoriya's eyes openly displayed his melancholy as he read the name. Midoriya. His mother. He wasted no time looking through his mother's file until he found death certificate. Scan the date, his already low mood dropping even further. 3 years later. 3 years, to his knowledge, that she spent not knowing where he was. He sighed, deflating. He ignored Aizawa's sympathetic look. He opened the next file. Midoriya Chitose. His sister. In the back of his mind took note of Aizawa shifting in his seat, but he was completely focused on the files and certificates in front of him. Birth certificate, medical files, dental records, foster home? She went into the foster system? Aizawa looked mildly surprised that he was speaking. Yes, after your mother passed. Midoriya blinked. And my dad? Aizawa looked caught off guard. Tsukachi said he couldn't find any official records of him. The Quirk Wars took its toll, unfortunately. What about your father? I have no idea where he was for all this. Why didn't he look after Chitose? Aizawa's face pulled into a small frown, but his eyes gave away his sadness. Midoriya kept looking through the folder. There wasn't much of interest until he got to the end. Ignoring the death certificate, he pulled out quite the opposite. A birth certificate? The tired man across from him managed a small, sincere smile. You're an uncle, Midoriya. She had children. And her kids had kids and so on and so forth. She had kids? Did she get married too? Did she settle down, live her life, never knowing what happened to me? Chi-chan, I miss you. I never stopped missing you. I'm sorry. I wish I could have been there. Seen it all happen, seen you again. Midoriya turned away from Aizawa, wiping his face. One of her great-something grandchildren actually lives in Mizudafu. She is more than happy to meet you, if that's something you would want. The green-haired teen blinked. Wow, that's kind of unexpected. It was a lot. A lot to process, to think about. What's her name? Inko. He liked that name. I think I want to meet her. Would she be able tomorrow? Or the day after? Aizawa looked like he thought it was a bad idea. Midoriya knew he shouldn't get attached to the idea of his great-something grandniece. But he just had to meet her. Maybe he shouldn't have been so quick to ignore his past. Okay, no, he definitely shouldn't have. But after he started talking about it, the more he wanted to. The more he wanted to know, wanted to remember. The more he wished he could just be back there. Aizawa, standing up out of his seat, pulled him back to reality, the faces of people he used to know floating back into the recesses of his mind. I can call her tomorrow morning. Hisashi was right, it's late. I think you should get some sleep, you've had a long day. Midoriya nodded once, gently nudging Chonk off of him. He walked beside Aizawa as they made their way to their separate bedrooms. Right as Aizawa reached for the door handle, Yamada had closed it to give them privacy. Midoriya pulled him into a hug. Aizawa only paused for a fraction of a second before he wrapped his arms around the all-too-young boy. Midoriya took a deep breath, hiding his face against Aizawa's chest. When they separated, Aizawa gave his head a few gentle pats and a small grin, teeth and all. Midoriya closed the door to his room, leaning his head against the door as he let out a wet sigh. Wiping his eyes for what felt like the 20th time that night, he rounded his bed, saying goodnight to Rhett and changed. When he was comfortable in bed, facing Rhett, he let himself relax and just be in the moment. There was a haziness in his head he wasn't used to when he woke up. Stuffy. Like his skull was too big for his head. It was uncomfortable, and he wasn't sure if it was all the crying or a sickness that was causing it. He stumbled into the kitchen, hair all over the place and his pajamas not much better. He hadn't slept well. Rhett told him he had been tossing and turning all night. The only thing he could think of was his family. He tried not to focus on them when he had first been rescued, but as time went by and he was getting more comfortable with Aizawa and Yamada, the more they crossed his mind. He loved his family. He loved his mother and his father. He had always gotten on with his siblings, even if he could barely remember his brother. It took him longer than it should to recall his name. The thought made him uncontrollably sad. I'm so sorry, Hiroto. You would never let me hear the end of it if you could see me now. He ambled into the kitchen, making himself some tea. Aizawa was already there, downing an irrational amount of scalding coffee. Why are you trying to make your heart explode? Aizawa gave him a look that let him know that the man hadn't slept well either. Netsu asked me to come in this morning. Something about the incoming first years. I'm pretty sure he only asked me because I expelled my class this year. How are you allowed to expel a whole class? Aizawa shrugged. That's just how UA works. Plus, just because someone passes the entrance exam doesn't mean they're hero material. If I wasn't tough on them now, it's unlikely they'd make it through 1 year as a pro. Midoriya paused, mildly horrified. That's a bit intense for 7 in the morning. Aizawa shrugged again, pouring himself yet another mug of the dirty bean water. Midoriya was concerned for his heart yet again. How are you as fit as you are when you consume coffee like a first-year university student? Aizawa grinned like a madman, eyes wide and showing off all of his teeth. Lucky genes, kid. Midoriya laughed it off, sipping his cooking tea. Did you call Inko? Aizawa gulped back the last of the coffee, practically gasping for air afterwards. Yep, she said you could call over at any time. The boy's eyebrows shot to his hairline. Whoa, I'm glad she's so enthusiastic about this. Aizawa eyed him. You're having some doubts? Oh, yeah. I don't know. Want to talk about it? Midoriya pursed his lips. I don't want to inadvertently replace my sister with Inko. I don't know anything about her, but I feel guilty about it. Even if I hadn't ended up there, I never would have known her. So why do I feel like I owe it to Inko to let her know me? Aizawa rubbed his neck. I wouldn't be the best person to ask about this, but I don't think you have anything to worry about. Oh, but I should tell you. Inko's son recently passed, and I'm not sure how well she is dealing with it. I wouldn't want her to attach herself to you either. It wouldn't be healthy, for either of you. Midoriya was internally freaking out. He really, desperately wanted to know Inko. Any connection to his family, but he didn't want to hurt her either. Externally, he nodded. I think I'll go over at lunch. Maybe I'll bring a cake. Aizawa leveled him with an unreadable look. Do you want me to be there? Midoriya bit his lip. Yes, please. The green-haired boy stood proudly, holding a just-purchased sponge cake in both hands. Aizawa was standing by his side, in slightly more presentable clothing than usual. They made eye contact, both nodding, before Aizawa pressed the doorbell. Soon after, they could hear lots of small thuds, before the welcoming door in front of them swung open. Midoriya immediately took in her appearance. She looked very similar to his family members. Familiar round features, large eyes, and bright green hair. She had the face of his sister. The same straight hair, just lighter in color. The same green eyes, except this woman looked tired. So tired. Inko was staring at him with equal intent. Incredibly sad for a moment, before brightening. She smiled warmly, and Midoriya instantly felt at home. Hello there. My name is Akatani Inko, but my maiden name is Midoriya Inko. I suppose you are my great-uncle of some sort, but I'm aware I'm much older than you. Midoriya breathed. Even her voice. So familiar. He smiled the biggest, widest grin he could manage without crying. Hi, I'm Midoriya Izuku. I suppose I am, but that does sound a bit weird to say. This is Aizawa Shoyuda, and we brought you this cake. Her face took on an emotion that was so shockingly close to what he was experiencing, it left him feeling raw as she beckoned them inside and poured out some freshly brewed tea. Once they were settled, sipping their tea in serene silence, Aizawa was the one to break the only slightly awkward tension. So, Mrs. Akatani, I'd like to thank you for reaching out when Tsukachi found you. Inko waved her hand, dismissing the thought. Oh, not at all. I am always happy to meet with family. I'm an only child, you see, and my husband works in America. I'm afraid I don't have much company lately. Even though she was smiling while she spoke, Midoriya could feel the sadness coming off her in waves. He thought of her son. His grand-nephew of some sort. It made him upset to think about, so he put it out of his head. Midoriya? He looked up upon being called. She was looking at him openly. Yes? If you don't mind me asking, are your hands all right? I have bandages lying around somewhere if you'd like to change them. Huh. He looked down at his hands. He'd worn a long-sleeved shirt again. His hands were poking out from under the too long sleeve. Bright white. Like a bandage. Oh. It's not bandages. These are my hands. He held up his arms, letting the sleeves pool around his forearms. His prosthetics were fully on display. She looked caught off guard. Oh my goodness, I didn't mean to overstep. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have asked. Midoriya waved his arms around awkwardly. Oh, no, don't worry. They, are a part of my quirk. She paused in her fretting. He showed her his hands, shifting them into a portal gun and back. Inko watched with fascination. My, that's impressive. But, I thought you didn't have a quirk? At least, that's what that nice detective told me. Technically I don't. But I'm trying to get into UA. So I'm saying that it's my quirk. Her eyes looked afar away for a moment. Well, I wish you the best of luck with that. I'm sure you can do it if you put your mind to it. He was taken aback by the sincerity of her words. He smiled, thanking her. She looked happy, genuinely happy with herself. He wondered how much those words meant to her. The conversation, after that, flowed much easier. They talked about anything and everything, with Aizawa chiming in every so often. It was nice. Really nice. He felt so comfortable with Inko, even if he barely knew her for more than a few hours. When it was time for them to go, she gave him her number herself, making him promise to call her about his exam results. Now, regardless of what the results are, you should come over. I can make more tea, or make dinner, whatever you'd like. Midoriya smiled wide. Thank you, Mrs. Akatani. I appreciate it more than you probably think. She smiled up at him. None of that, Mrs. Stuff, you can call me Inko. You are my uncle after all. He let out a breathy laugh, nodding. Well, please call me Izuku. They shared a gentle smile. Inko opened her arms to him. He didn't hesitate to lean down to her, wrapping her tightly in his arms. He sighed into her cardigan. The hug reminded him of his mother and sister. He had to plead with his tear ducts not to ruin her clothes. Unbeknownst to him, Inko was experiencing a very similar thing. They separated and she walked them to the door. They said their goodbyes, and both went about their day as normal as one could try to. That night, Midoriya fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. He was walking through a corridor. It was long and dark. No windows or light, other than that pouring out from the door at the end. The hazy feeling in his head got worse and worse as he walked, but he couldn't stop. He tried and tried to fight against the natural movement of his legs, but it was for naught. What lay beyond the door was blindingly bright as he finally reached it. He squinted, pushing it open. A white, spacious room, with a few black flooring tiles and walls disrupting the perfection. He walked forward, to the center of the massive enclosed center. The word enrichment popped into his head as he walked further into the room. He ignored it. He noticed a cube a few paces away from him. He reached out, intending to lift it. His portal gun was gone. He looked down at his hands. The skin looked wrong, pulled and stretched awkwardly over the bone. He looked for his gun. Nothing. He heard himself call out before he could think about what he was doing. GLaDOS? He looked at the cameras in the corner of the room. Ah, a robotic voice echoed throughout the chamber. I'm glad to see you on your own 2 feet. I was beginning to think I'd have to send a search bot after you. Did you get distracted by your own reflection? He felt himself roll his eyes. GLaDOS, where's my portal gun? I can't do the test if I don't have it. GLaDOS didn't respond for a few minutes. It was unsettling. The room felt like it was getting bigger, and Midoriya felt very alone. You already have it? Midoriya startled at GLaDOS' voice. It was way too close to his ear. Looking around, he couldn't see her anywhere. GLaDOS? She hummed. Why, just look at your hands. He felt his hands rise up in front of his face. The skin still looked all wrong. Unnatural. His left hand came to a halt above his right, and he let his head close into a fist. Jerking his arm back, the skin came away. It should have hurt. He should have screamed. There should be blood and pain and something. But there was just white. When GLaDOS spoke again, the voice came from inside his head. Let's continue. Midoriya woke up in a cold sweat, breathing heavily. He was gripping his nightshirt in a vice-like grip. He looked around his room wildly, his eyes halting on Rhett. You're here. He looked around again, seeing all of the small things he'd added to his room over the last few months. A small cat charm on his desk, the books Yamada had bought him, along with a present mic poster adorning his walls. He breathed carefully in and out. Thanks, Rhett. Rhett beeped content. Midoriya lay back down, but he knew he wouldn't get back to sleep. Midoriya was staring at the small metal disc on his desk. It wasn't exactly what he was expecting to fall out of the envelope. Said envelope had just been handed to him by Aizawa, who looked like he didn't want to accidentally reveal anything with his eyes. The small, round disc had clinked and fallen with a thud, surprising him. Why isk? Why not just a letter or a phone call or something? He spent a good 10 minutes trying to figure out how to turn the damn thing on, but when he finally found the tiny button, which was way harder to find than it should have been, it blasted to life. He sprung back with a start as the projection displayed itself, knocking over his chair. Rhett beeped from its spot in the corner. Sorry. Just got a shock. He pulled his chair back under him and scooted back to the desk. The projection seemed like it was waiting for him to get settled. Freaky. As soon as he stopped shuffling, the bright figure of All Might in a luminescent yellow suit filled up the OI screen. Midoriya wasn't sure what to call it. Damn All Might? Midoriya was aware he knew very little about the number one hero. He had studied some other well-known heroes he could find, some villains that intrigued him, and even this one vigilante. He found it really peculiar that there was so little information available about the symbol of peace. He thought it was a bit suspicious. Obviously, the top hero in the country would need a certain level of privacy, but Endeavor seemed to be doing just fine with his privacy. The same with Best Jeanist. All top heroes, but there was literally nothing online that he could find that delved into any of All Might's personal life. Young Midoriya. Midoriya startled violently. Oh right, he thought, my results? I am here. As a projection. He smiled, rolling his eyes playfully. Well done on completing the UA entrance exam. As I'm sure you're aware, UA is very exclusive, so congratulations on getting this far. Midoriya was already losing confidence in his performance at the exam. Also, did All Might shout everything he says? Or was that just an on-camera thing? Now, on to your results. You passed the written exam with flying colors. I applaud you. The green-haired boy giggled to himself as All Might was very obviously reading off a cue card. And as for the physical exam, I can confidently say that you earned 34 points. An admirable amount, but I'm sure you know how competitive the exam is. The cutoff this year was at 35 points. So I'm afraid to say that you... Midoriya leaned forward in his seat as All Might paused. He felt himself getting colder. Have passed. Well done, young man. You see, there was a secret, unknown extra aspect to the exam, rescue points. How could this esteemed, world-renowned hero school deny a hero-hopeful entry for doing heroic deeds? And so, rescue points were created. And you, young Midoriya, have earned 40 points, taking your total up to a whopping 74 points. Midoriya let out a massive sigh of relief, relaxing back into his seat. An excellent score, young man. You've even placed joint second overall. It is my pleasure to welcome you to UA's Class 1A, young Midoriya. This is your hero academia. The projection cut out. The boy scrubbed at his eyes. He hadn't cried, but he was damn near close to it. Knowing that he'd gotten in, that he'd done well. It was like a weight off his chest. He allowed a small, content smile to take over his face. All Might had been so nice. He was starting to understand why he was also well known for his interactions with civilians. Midoriya may have looked up a few videos after the whole sludge villain incident. Let's just say he felt like a monster for brushing off the big, lovable man so harshly. Distantly, he registered his phone buzz softly in the background. Right, his new friends. Were they friends yet? He didn't really know. He hadn't had friends in what felt like millennia. He unplugged the phone and lay back on his bed, opening the many messages he'd received from Uraraka, Ida, Shinso, and Inko. As he was typing out a response to her messages, Uraraka called him. Hey, how did you get on? He sat up, adjusting his pillow. I did well. Really well, thanks for asking. Did you get into 1A too? He held the phone away from his ear as she cheered for him. It was a bit embarrassing, receiving so much praise in such a short window. In Aperture, he was mostly belittled. Maybe the odd backhanded compliment, but, anyways. I knew you'd do well, and yeah, I got in. Actually, have you heard from Ida yet? Yeah, you called me before I could get to it though. Midoriya chuckled at her frantic apology. Hey, it's fine. I was making a joke. She audibly sighed. Mean, I was worried I upset you. But whatever, Ida got in as well. Isn't it great? We'll be classmates. That is great, I can't wait. Me neither. Oh sorry, I have to go. My dad is calling me. After exchanging goodbyes, Midoriya responded to Ida's curt and proper texts. He liked Ida. He was unique. Very serious and studious, but so kind and open to making new friends. Their messages were quick, but he still felt warm and fuzzy at the prospect of 2 of his 3 friends being in his class. He opened the one message Shinso had sent him. It was short, but Midoriya's face lit up. "Thank you." He immediately sent back a smiley face and asking what class he had gotten into before opening the text he had received from Inko. She had wished him luck, asked him to visit again, and offered to help him with his hero costume. What an amazing woman. He quickly let her know the good news and agreed to the visit. He pushed himself off his bed and swung open his door to see Yamada directly outside. He stumbled back, eyes wide in surprise. "Sorry. I'm sorry, I was about to knock, I swear." Midoriya giggled at the blonde. He patted his shoulder twice, trying to comfort him. "It's fine, it just caught me off guard. Where's Aizawa? I want to tell you my results." Yamada's smile waned slightly. "Sorry, little listener, he had to run out. Patrol. But we both knew your results last week. Well done." Midoriya accepted the praise, but he had to push down his spike of disappointment. "Want hot chocolate? I was about to make some for myself." Midoriya grinned. "Always." Midoriya awkwardly tugged on the bright red tie. He couldn't tie a tie. He'd never needed to before, and he had no idea what the UA uniform comprised of. He exhaled, defeated after struggling with the strip of fabric for too long. The rest of the uniform was nothing particularly amazing, just a standard gray blazer with dark teal trousers and a white button-up. It was just the damn tie that was pissing him off. He'd only worn a jumpsuit for around 2 years of his life, he didn't need to be able to tie a Windsor knot. He grunted, pulling the forsaken tie off his shoulders. Grabbing his bag and pulling on his comfortable red sneakers, he resigned himself to asking Aizawa or Yamada. It was Yamada that ended up tying it for him. Aizawa had been too busy laughing at him. He had apologized, however, and agreed to drive him to school. The building was just as big as he remembered. Fucking gargantuan, and that was just the main school building. He made his way through the halls and approached the tall door labeled 1. He gave himself a quick few words of encouragement and flung the door open. "Keep your feet off the desks. Make me you fucking extra." Oh boy. Midoriya was already exhausted. Ida was in a comical shout-off with, "Bakugu?" Midoriya idly took note of how different the blonde was acting compared to the last time he saw him. A lot louder, for starters. "You are disrespecting the students who used these desks before us. Where are your manners? Huh? Were you born with that stick-up-your-ass for eyes?" Ida recoiled, offended. "For eyes? Excuse me, I believe we got off on the wrong foot. My name is Ida Tenya. I used to attend semi-private academic dash." Bakugu tilted his head, challenging him. "Semi? What? You think you're so much better than me, you elite fucker. Pardon? I'll have you know dash." Okay, Midoriya couldn't watch it any longer. Neither of the boys had noticed him yet, and no one else in the room seemed to be bothered to do anything about the yelling. "Ida. Good morning." The two turned to the green-haired boy's distraction. Ida perked up at his presence, while Bakug, he kind of shrunk into himself a bit. Ida quickly approached him, shaking his hands mechanically. "Welcome, Midoriya. I'm glad to see you early and prepared to learn. I must say, you teased out the true meaning of the exam." Midoriya raised an eyebrow. "Huh. You figured out that the exam was to prove yourself as a competent hero, in both combat and rescue." "Thank you." The taller boy bowed stiffly at the waist. Whoa, don't worry about it. And I don't think I did as much as you think I did. We had only spoken once before, but when I called you to help me with Uraraka, you didn't have to help. You very easily could have turned into other direction and fought more robots. But you decided to help. It was admirable of you. Ida flustered at the praise. Hell yeah. The two boys spun around to see Uraraka at the door. "Hey, good morning." She high-fived Midoriya as she walked in and coming to a stop beside Ida, throwing him a smile. They made idle chatter as they reacquainted themselves. "Excuse me." Midoriya's head turned so fast both Ida and Uraraka cringed. Ouch, muscle strain. "Shinso." Midoriya had his arms thrown up over his head, a massive smile on his face. Shinso looked a bit awkward. Thanks again for, the entrance exam. Midoriya grabbed his arm, pulling him further into the room to introduce him to Uraraka and Ida. If you're just here to socialize, you can get out. Midoriya held back a laugh at Aizawa in all his glory, wrapped like a burrito in his sleeping bag. He bit down on his lip as Uraraka and a pink girl shrieked. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down. Absolutely unacceptable. Everyone to your seats. Midoriya sat down at number 18, ignoring the fact that he was sitting behind Bakugo. My name is Aizawa Shoyuda. I'll be your homeroom teacher for the next year. I don't tolerate laziness, so if you think this will be easy breezy, you might as well quit now. Any takers? He paused, waiting. Midoriya could already tell that most of the class feared the tired man. They weren't wrong to fear him, but not the amount they probably did. Could everyone take one of these and get changed? Aizawa zipped open his sleeping bag, somehow producing 20 tracksuits. Where are we going, sensei? He knew he was the only one who would be calm enough to ask, or not get killed by the glare Aizawa threw at him. He knew he was only doing it to assert himself as a no-nonsense teacher. The track fields. We're doing an apprehension test. Uraraka was the only other person to raise their hand. What about orientation? Aizawa smiled, showing off all his teeth. It was pretty creepy. UA allows staff more freedom than other schools when it comes to the curriculum. In other words, I do what I want. Midoriya actually snickered at that. Shinso looked at him weirdly, and Midoriya quickly pretended to be coughing. What are you waiting for? Get to it. Grabbing his own tracksuit, he made his way to the changing rooms, chatting with Ida, Uraraka, and a more reluctant Shinso. Midoriya didn't know what was up with him. He seemed like he wanted to make friends and talk and have fun, but he kept stopping himself every time he had the opportunity to chime in with his thoughts. Midoriya tried prompting him as much as possible, but Shinso was stubborn. It seemed he'd have to work extra hard to get him to loosen up a bit. Fuck. Midoriya was panicking a little. A bit? Okay, a lot. Somehow, it hadn't crossed his mind that he would be changing in front of everyone else. He wouldn't have any issue with it really, aside from his arms. And legs. And shoulders. And the disc in his chest. Okay, so there was a lot, and that's not even counting all the scars. He shuddered as little as possible. The other boys were chatting amongst themselves, or outright ignoring everyone else, i.e. Bakugo. He slowly reached for the tracksuit pants. His legs could probably escape notice, especially considering how many of his classmates were fascinated with Ida's legs. He silently begged that no one would ask him about his stark white, definitely not fleshy legs. Miraculously, people seemed preoccupied with a spiky red head who was showing off his buff arms. The red head felt familiar, but Midoriya couldn't place him, so he returned to his task. He pulled off his tie, he was going to have some fun trying to put that back on, and his blazer, folding them neatly on the bench. His cybernetic fingers reached for his shirt buttons. He stayed facing to the wall as he slowly starting undoing each. One after the other. He kept focusing on his breathing as he fumbled with the last button. He tugged the shirt off his shoulders and reached for his tracksuit shirt. The zipper on the front of the tracksuit got stuck. Fuck, no way. He hunched over on himself, tugging at the apparently invincible zipper. The fucking thing wouldn't budge. Shinso, on his left, picked up on his distress, but Midoriya waved him off with a plastered-on smile. Shinso squinted suspiciously. His eyes briefly shifted to his arms, before he turned back to his own bag. Midoriya let out a breathy sigh of relief. Oh. He flinched, hoping whoever said it was talking to someone else. He held his shirt in front of his chest, trying to hide the disc. Half of the boys were looking at his back when he turned around. The spiky red head smiled at him. It didn't do much to alleviate the tension he was suddenly feeling. He took note of some of the people staring at him. A yellow blonde with a black strip in his hair, a guy with a crow's head, a guy with half red, half white hair, Baku. The red head spoke up when the silence dragged on. Hey, I'm Kirishima. Sorry, dude. You're so buff. What's your secret? Huh. He blinked a few times. Kirishima smiled, all fangs. Wait, I know you, from the entrance exam, right? Kirishima looked caught off guard. One of his hands rubbed at the back of his neck. He was running his fingers through his now red hair. Yeah. I'm flattered you remember me. Hey. I'm Kaminari. Dude, you must get so many girls fawning over you with those pecs. Kirishima snorted. Not really? Kaminari raised an eyebrow, hands on his hips. Sounds fake, but okay. You heard it here first, folks. Muscles aren't everything. Midoriya chuckled at the yellow blonde's antics. He glanced around at his classmates, who were all watching Kaminari chase Kirishima around with his shirt. All except for eye contact. Of course, just his luck he made eye contact with the half-and-half boy. He was pretty intensely looking at him. More specifically, at his chest. Midoriya knew he had a lot of scars. That was no secret. He wasn't particularly fond of other people seeing them, not that many had. At least with Kirishima and Kaminari, they had been subtle as they got an eyeful. This guy, though, it was making him uncomfortable. He felt like he was being looked at under a microscope. He turned around again, trying once more to pull the zipper open. Still no luck. He let out a little grunt of frustration. Pardon me. The monotone voice shocked him out of his thoughts. He looked up, coming face to face with the half-and-half boy. Fuck. The other boy silently held out his shirt. Huh. The boy looked away. You clearly don't want people seeing them. I can understand that. It took until then for Midoriya to realize that the boy had a massive scar over his left eye. A piercing blue eye looked back at him. He looked back at the shirt. What about you? I'll request another from Aizawa-sensei. Midoriya wanted to tear up at the act of kindness. You're sure? The boy looked confused at his hesitation. Yes. I don't thank you, that was really kind of you. The boy's eyes widened. He looked away again. Midoriya pulled the shirt on, zipping it on over the disc on his chest. As that of the students gathered in the wide field, Midoriya wished he wore a long-sleeved shirt under his uniform. His arms were very clearly on display. In his peripherals, he could see a few people looking at him. Aizawa looked very, very bored, but held eye contact with him for a few seconds, gauging how he was feeling. Midoriya subtly nodded. Aizawa blinked slowly, and went back to glaring at the class. Attention now. His deadpan voice cut through the excited chatter of the students. I will be conducting a test of your skills, from fitness to ability with your quirk. Depending on how you place, you'll be ranked. Midoriya raised his eyebrows. Oh, and whoever places last. They will be deemed unfit for the hero course and will be expelled on the spot. Welcome to UA. A few students cried out in shock, anger, fear. Midoriya narrowed his eyes. Aizawa wasn't joking. Midoriya liked to think he'd gotten pretty good at reading the man, and none of his tells were on show. He was serious. He was planning on expelling a student by the end of the day. What the fuck? Bakugo. The blonde looked to Aizawa. What was your ball throw high score in middle school? 63 meters. Midoriya wondered how the fuck he knew that off the top of his head. Aizawa threw him a baseball. Or at least it looked like a baseball. I know you were told not to use your quirks in PE in middle school, but throw that out the window. For this, Bakugo, do whatever you want, just don't leave the circle. He gestured to a circle painted on the dirt. The blonde strolled over at a leisurely pace, and Midoriya could tell Aizawa was losing patience. Bakugo tossed the ball up once, twice. He winded his arm back and flung the ball forward. Die. Die. The ball was flung forward in a massive explosion. Wow, fitting quirk for a fitting personality, I guess. Aizawa held up his phone. Over 700? Kaminari was staring in the direction the ball went. This is the level expected of hero students. Let's begin the tests. The tests themselves weren't too bad. Midoriya was pretty damn fit on his own, without needing the help of the portals. During the grip test, he got second after Shuji, at a whopping 324.5 kilograms. He hadn't realized his hands were as strong as they were. After coming third in the endurance run, it was onto the ball throw. He had been dreading it, to be honest. There were little to no places he could put portals, so he'd have to rely on strength alone. He wasn't sure if he'd done enough to make the final cut just yet. Uraraka stepped up to the circle, not hesitating to throw the ball. It flew and flew and flew. It took Midoriya a solid few seconds to remember what her quirk was. Aizawa's reader app called out infinity, and Uraraka blushed under the immediate praise. Shinso, you're up next. Midoriya had been wondering how Shinso had been getting on. They hadn't been able to speak much since starting the test. Shinso stepped up to the circle. He looked nervous. Uraraka? The green-haired boy watched curiously as Shinso got her attention. Oh yeah. Her eyes glazed over. Throw the ball with your quirk? She ambled over to him, taking the ball from his hands. She winded up her arm with far less gusto this time. It flew out of view. Aizawa showed the infinity sign again, smirking. Shinso visibly relaxed, coming to stand beside Midoriya again. Midoriya smiled at him. Shinso blinked, clearly expecting something. He looked at the rest of the class. No one paid him any mind. Midoriya knew he thought no one was looking, because a small smile took over his face. Lastly, Midoriya? Oh God. Midoriya slowly walked up to the circle drawn into the sand, eyes darting around as he looked for anything he could use to his advantage. He hadn't done badly by any means, but he didn't want to barely scrape by either. The portals were incredibly versatile, and if people wrote him off on the first day because he didn't have a proper opportunity to use them, he'd be pissed with himself and Aizawa. He wasn't even sure why he cared so much. Surely it didn't make a difference what other people thought of him, right? But the second he was in the changing room, it's all he could think about. How his classmates saw him. To be fair to them, no one said anything rude or invasive really. The boy with the split-colored hair, Aizawa had called Todoroki, seemed to be the only one who could tell he was uncomfortable. Was he overthinking it? Maybe, but he found it strange how much of an emphasis on quirks there was literally everywhere he went. From when he got out of Aperture to that moment, everything seemed to surround quirks. He wondered how they could ever understand how life used to be for him. He stepped into the circle. Aizawa's eyes were burning with curiosity, and Midoriya took a deep breath. He adjusted his grip on the baseball, looking at the small screen. It displayed the number 0. Midoriya glanced around once more, trying to decide on some way to impress both Aizawa and his classmates. His eyes were drawn to the moon, barely visible in the bright blue sky. He smirked to himself as he turned around, facing the school building. He could hear the murmurs of the others as he prepared himself. This was either going to work really, really well, or go horribly wrong. He idly wondered what GLaDOS would say if she could see what he was about to do. He turned, briefly, to face his classmates. You may want to hold on to something sturdy. Their confusion was comical, to say the least. Aizawa looked concerned at best. Taking a deep breath, he aimed the portal gun at the wall in front of him. In the blink of an eye, he shot his blue portal at the wall before flinging the ball, and throwing up his other portal at the moon's surface. Time seemed to move in slow motion as he waited for the telltale sparkle of the portal as it landed. All of a sudden, the portals snapped open, and Midoriya braced himself against the powerful vacuum of space. He watched as the ball went through, literal milliseconds away from slamming into concrete. Something gray caught his eye. What the hell? He knew it was a stupid idea. He knew Aizawa would probably kill him for it later, that is, if it didn't kill him right then and there. He leapt at the portal, slamming his legs into the wall right at the edge. There, a spherical object. And an Aperture Science logo proudly emblazoned on the side. He leaned into the portal, reaching for whatever it was. He exhaled all the air from his lungs and just got a grip on the handle, when something started pulling him back to Earth. The second he passed through, he shut the portals. What had felt like hours had actually only been mere seconds. His classmates were staring at him as if his head had fallen off. Shinso looked openly concerned, which warmed Midoriya's heart. He looked furious. He stormed over to him, yanking him to his feet. What the fuck were you thinking? Midoriya blinked. Aizawa was squeezing his shoulders with an iron grip. It would probably have hurt if Midoriya could feel any pain in them. What? Aizawa's eye twitched as his face twisted. What do you mean, what? I asked you to throw a ball and you rip open a fucking portal to space. You said to show off our abilities. I was doing what I had to dash. What you had to? I just had to pull you back from outer space. And for what? A gray ball? Midoriya clenched his fists, holding said gray balls tightly against his side. If you must know, it has an aperture symbol on it, which I would have told you if you hadn't just freaked out on me. Aizawa somehow managed to look angrier. Freaked out? Freaked out. I blinked and you were leaping off of the fucking planet. The green-haired boy glanced at his classmates, all of whom were trying not to look too interested in Aizawa's rage. Aizawa, you don't understand. Do you think I don't know what I'm doing? Of course GLaDOS taught me about space. I know that humans can survive for a good 2 minutes, if they know what they're doing, and even more considering air was being sucked in around me. Why won't you just hear me out? Aizawa sneered. It made Midoriya feel small. He hated that feeling. I was asked to take care of you. How could I have possibly explained that you died because you willingly ejected yourself into space? Midoriya glared at him from under his bangs. I just told you I knew what I was doing. Do you not trust me to take care of myself? If you bothered to let me talk about aperture at all, I probably would have mentioned it. Aizawa shrunk slightly. Midoriya persisted. Don't think I haven't noticed. When I try to talk about my cybernetics, you changed the subject. You didn't trust me with Ret after I told you its original purpose, and we never train with my portals. I don't have a clue about the upper limits of the guns. Before the entrance exam, I hadn't used them in months. If you're uncomfortable with me, I want you to tell me. Aizawa rubbed his temples. Midoriya stood his ground. I am not uncomfortable with you, Midoriya. Am I a bad person for not wanting to hear about the atrocities you went through for 2 full years? Well, it's better than pretending they never happened. Aizawa looked over at the class. And what are you doing with that? Midoriya looked at the sphere. It might be damaged. I'd like to take a look at it. Aizawa wouldn't look at him. Take it to the support labs, you're free to leave after that. Aizawa walked back to the class. Shinso still looked concerned. A few other students seemed interested in his display. Without another word, Midoriya turned and headed for the labs. He didn't bother sticking around for his results. He knew he did enough to pass, and he didn't care if Aizawa put him dead last out of spite. Nedza liked him too much to allow Aizawa to expel him. Whoa, calm down. He wouldn't do anything that rash. He cares, just take a breath. He sighed, rubbing his face. The giant, metal doors to the labs flew off their hinges as Midoriya reached them. He narrowly missed being impaled by the shrapnel. What the hell, is everyone okay? He fanned the smoke from his face as he slowly entered. Hey, what are you doing here? What's that you have there? A girl with pink dreadlocks and yellow eyes was bouncing excitedly in front of him. She was absolutely covered in ash, presumably from whatever caused the explosion. Hi, I'm Midoriya. I'm in the hero course and, I was looking for Power Loader. The girl started aggressively patting the ash. Nice to meet you, Greenie, I'm Hatsum. Power Loader stepped out for a few minutes. I'm going to be the most successful engineer of hero support tech ever. Come here, I need to show you some of my babies. She grabbed Midoriya by the wrist opposite to the sphere and dragged him, quite forcefully, to the workstation. Babies? Hatsum stopped for a second before laughing at him. Sorry, not actual babies, that's just what I call my creations. They are super cool and efficient, plus I dash. She stopped. Midoriya was terrified of what she was about to do. She was looking at the ball. I asked when you arrived and you never answered me. What is that? Midoriya held the thing between them. The aperture logo was clear for all to see. Oh, that's kind of why I came. I grabbed this during one of Aizawa's training things. I'm trying to figure out what it is. She examined it curiously. Her eyes landed on the logo. She rubbed her chin, which only spread more soot over her face. Aperture Science. Not every day you see that company anymore. Midoriya jerked back. Wait, you know about Aperture? Hatsum tilted her head at him. Oya, I'm studying to become a tech expert. Of course I know about Aperture Science. It was one of the most technologically advanced companies in the world until it went bankrupt. All of their development centers closed except one, but after the Quirk Wars, its location was lost. I never thought I'd see some of their technology in person. Midoriya was having trouble believing what he was hearing. She knew about the company? GLaDOS always made it seem as though Aperture was extremely secretive. For a while, he thought it was an illegal government research facility. The illegal part was right, but it was no government-approved company. You think you can get it working? Her eyes seemed to glow with anticipation. Can I? I can definitely. Let me get my tools. She started dashing around her workspace, grabbing all kinds of utensils and blueprints and even a hamster ball. No hamster in sight, just the ball. She laid out all her stuff next to the sphere. Plucking some sort of screwdriver from the pile, she slowly leaned towards it, aiming for the 2 gray flaps on the front. Flaps that flew open right as she tried to touch them. Whoa. That's a bit rude, isn't it? Trying to poke someone's screws while they aren't operating. Fierce rude. Where am I? Hatsum seemed to get even more excited the second it started speaking in a strong English accent. The flaps had opened to reveal a bright blue eye that was rapidly looking between the two of them. Midoriya cleared his throat. You're in Japan? The ball got a bit fidgety. Wow, Japan. How on earth did I end up here? Last I remember, I was floating around in space. Crazy altogether. Hatsum looked at Midoriya. You speak English? Said boy shrunk a little under her gaze. Yeah. I learned a bit a few years back. My dad was fluent. So anyways, who are ye? Are ye holding me hostage? I can guarantee none of my co-workers will pay the ransom. Midoriya tried not to flinch at the mention of its co-workers. We are students, and no, we are not holding you hostage. That logo, are you from the Aperture Science Facility in Michigan? It turned to him as much as it could, really. Boy, I don't know if there are many others, to be quite honest. I'd like to know how you know about it. I'm pretty sure dead scientists can't reveal sensitive information. Midoriya closed his mouth. Regardless, I'd quite like to go back now, if you don't mind. No jet lag for me, thankfully. Yeah. Midoriya debated what to say. He didn't know how much English Hatsum knew, and he didn't want to risk outing himself just yet. It's gone. It blew up, the story was all over the news. Oh, I was not expecting that. I wonder how that happened. Very curious indeed. I never got a good enough sense of the place when I was in control. I'm embarrassed to say, really, but I wasn't very good at her job. I don't know how she managed it all, actually. Her? Do you mean GLaDOS? It flinched. Yeah, she was quite possibly the scariest thing I've ever witnessed. Of course, I was daringly brave and held my own. Yep, I fought her off like a knight, until she took over again. And hold on, how do you know about GLaDOS, Fleshy? You were in control of the facility? Who and what are you? I'm Wheatley. And I don't appreciate the tone of voice, although I suppose it's nice hearing people other than GLaDOS talk. And I was a personality core until the facility bombed, I guess. Personality core? Yeah, impressive, isn't it? I'm an AI specifically designed to house a personality. The white coats made me to slow her down, but apparently I wasn't great at that, considering they were all breathing a deadly neurotoxin a few hours later. Personality core? GLaDOS never told me there were cores. What? There's more to this. I know that. He glanced at Hatsum, who was aggressively writing notes in a small journal. She was grinning like a lunatic, but Midoriya didn't care as long as she wasn't paying too much attention to what he was saying. So, Wheatley, how did you get control of Aperture? Oh, it's a long and funny story, actually. You'll probably laugh. Maybe. I don't know. I was woken up because all of the incubating test subjects were dead, because the power was gone. There was one mute that survived though. Yeah, I tried to help her out, because GLaDOS had been shut down and the place was in disrepair, but she turned GLaDOS back on somehow. Midoriya found it hard to follow. So anyway, GLaDOS had her back in the testing chambers and I hatched a brilliant plan to escape. We reached GLaDOS' lair and we switched cores. Isn't that crazy? Absolutely mad. So I was plugged into her connection point, gained complete power over the facility. I did. It was kind of mad. I may have gotten a bit in over my head, but regardless, even putting GLaDOS in a potato was no match for the two of them. Blasted me right onto the moon, they did. Midoriya swallowed heavily. The other girl. Was she Chell? Yeah. That's the one. Brave lady, a bit confusing at times. I really have to ask how you've heard about it. He hesitated, glancing over at Hatsum only to see her busily tinkering with something or other. He made his decision. I know about it because I was there. He held out a hand, watching it shift into a portal gun. Wow, she certainly doesn't waste any time. New data, new creations, that's all she was interested in. So you were there? Isn't it weird we never met? How crazy is that? I was told all the test subjects died of serious brain damage. Typical. And here you are, alive and breathing presumably. Midoriya chuckled. Yes, I'm breathing, Wheatley. Well, that's definitely good to know, thank you, for clarifying that. Yeah. So, do you have any preference as to where you go? Where I go? That sounds a bit serial killer-y, doesn't it? Ha. But no, I'm not very busy at the moment as it happens. Midoriya raised an eyebrow. Cool, I guess you're coming home with me. He picked Wheatley up by the handles. Switching back to Japanese, he got Hatsum's attention. Hey, thanks for your help, Hatsum. I'm going to head out, but good luck with the babies. She flashed him a toothy grin. Thanks. And good luck yourself, Mr. Hero. You should come back and let me have a look at your quirk. I might be able to make you something cool. Midoriya nodded, leaving through the still smoking doors. He met Yamada, who was still dressed up in his hero costume, on his way out of the school gates. What's up, little listener? Aizawa has some work he needs to do, so I'm bringing you home today. Oh, that looks cool. Where did you get that? Midoriya smiled, letting the older man pat his head. Wheatley stayed silent. During the quirk apprehension test. I'll explain later. The car ride was relatively short, but Midoriya was preoccupied thinking about his argument with Aizawa. He felt bad. Guilty. He knew he should have at least warned Aizawa of what he was going to do. Leaving Wheatley in space wasn't an option for him. The man was probably still fuming. He sighed, rubbing his head. Yamada, can I ask you something? The man didn't look away from the road, but he smiled. Ask away, kid. Thanks. This is kind of hard for me to ask, but is Aizawa uncomfortable with me? The yellow blonde glanced at him from the corner of his eyes. Hey, of course you don't make him uncomfortable. Yeah, I'll be honest. He's had some bad experiences in the past. We lost a friend of ours when we were teenagers. He blames himself. If he said something to you, I'm sure he didn't mean it. He gets attached to people and doesn't want to see them being harmed. I'm sure he's just concerned, but I can talk to him if you want. Midoriya sighed again. He felt even worse. No, don't bother. It was my own fault. I was out of line. I guess it bothers me more than it should that he never lets me just talk about aperture. It's like he wants to ignore it ever happened. Yamada tightened his grip on the wheel. I doubt it was all on you. Like I said, he can over-exaggerate situations in his head sometimes. I think he might just not want to think about you in a painful situation. I don't like thinking about it either, but I know you should be able to talk about it if you want to. I doubt he means to hurt you by ignoring it. To be honest, I've noticed it too, but I wasn't really sure what to say. Shoyuta is stubborn, but I'll talk to him. Thanks, Yamada. Please, my mother is Yamada. You can call me Hizashi. Midoriya lit up. Really? Go for it. Hey, Hizashi. If you want, you can call me Izuku. Hizashi smiled, showing off his pearly whites. I'll take you up on that, Izuku. Nice place you've got here. Not too shabby. Comfortable, modern. Architecturally sound. Overall a good home, really. Thanks, Wheatley. This is Yamada Hizashi. He's one of the people taking care of me. He's fluent in English. The yellow blonde smiled at the blue-eyed core. Nice to meet you. I assumed everything aperture was long gone, aside from my little buddy here. Yeah, I mean, I would too, to be honest. No fault there. You have very striking hair. Sorry. No, that was a compliment. But sorry. You know, if that offended you. If not, a compliment. If yes, sorry. Hizashi snorted. You're well able to talk. I like you. Midoriya set Wheatley down on the coffee table. Chonk sniffed him curiously. She settled next to him, blinking slowly. Oh wow. That's a creature. Hello. Greetings? Salutations. I assume it isn't a conversational species? Midoriya picked up Chonk, resting her over his shoulders. She purred against his head as he stroked her back. Yeah, she's a friendly cat, but unfortunately, cats can't speak. Sorry to disappoint. Wheatley shook as much as possible on the table. Oh no. No disappointment here. It doesn't look like it would be able for particularly riveting conversations. Sorry, that was kind of an insult. I don't know. It looks fluffy at least. That's definitely an upside. A plus. Being fluffy sounds quite nice. Midoriya rested Chonk on her scratching tower, letting her get settled before turning back to Wheatley. Oh, do you want to meet Rhett? Rhett? Is that another one of you fleshies? Or another creature? Like the cat you showed me just now? No, it's a turret. It's one of the only other things that survived the explosion. A turret? I'd rather not die, actually. Thank you. Midoriya snickered. Come on, Rhett is different. It hasn't shot me once yet? Hisashi stifled his laughter behind his fist. Opening the door to his room, he watched as Rhett flickered to life. Hello. Hey Rhett. This is Wheatley. He also came from Aperture. Hey, buddy chumpa. I'd rather not be shot, thanks. Yeah, if you could just not, that would be great. I won't. Thank you, that really means a lot, so thank you for that. Yeah. You hurt her. What's that now? Midoriya watched with interest as the two robots interacted. She hurt you. You took over. Wheatley looked around a bit awkwardly. Yeah, I did. You regret it? Wheatley blinked. Blinking, in his case, was more of the gray flaps moving over his glowing eye and less of an actual blink. I do. I wasn't really myself though, you know? GLaDOS body, you try to resist testing. She's practically wired to live off it. To this day, I have no idea how she managed to go about day by day without going mad. I trust you. Rhett's high-pitched and robotic voice rung through Midoriya's room. It gave Wheatley pause. That's a very lovely thing to say. Thank you. Midoriya grinned and walked further into the room. He set Wheatley down on his desk. Yeah, you are way too big for me to carry you around all the time. A thought struck him. I wonder if Hatsum will be busy tomorrow.